It began with thunder, not from the sky, but from the earth itself. In April 1945, as spring returned to Europe, the city of Berlin, once the proud heart of the Third Reich, became the stage for its final destruction. The Battle of Berlin was not merely a military campaign, it was an apocalypse, the violent death of a regime that had plunged the world into darkness. For 2 weeks the capital of Nazi Germany was turned into a graveyard of stone and fire. The Red Army advanced from the east in waves of men and steel, while inside the city, the last defenders, soldiers, teenagers, old men, and fanatics, prepared for an end they could not escape. Hitler still dreamed of victory, still issued orders to divisions that no longer existed as his empire collapsed around him. When it was over, Europe was changed forever. The Battle of Berlin was the final scream of a dying world, a moment when madness met inevitability, and the myth of the 1,000-year Reich was buried beneath its own ruins. By the spring of 1945, Germany was already finished, though few within dared to speak it aloud. The Allies were closing in from all sides. In the west, American, British, and French forces had crossed the Rhine and were sweeping toward the Elbe. In the east, the Soviet juggernaut, under Marshal Georgy Zhukov and Marshal Ivan Konev, had smashed through Poland and stood less than 60 miles from Berlin. The Red Army was massive, millions of men, tens of thousands of guns, thousands of tanks, and behind them lay a trail of vengeance. They came not only to end a war, but to avenge the unspeakable horrors of 4 years of invasion, slaughter, and loss. For them, Berlin was not just a city, it was justice. For the Germans inside, it was doom. Hitler, now a hollow echo of the man who had once commanded the world's attention, refused to flee. He had retreated into his Führer bunker, buried beneath the Reichschancellery, surrounded by loyalists, secretaries, and the last fragments of his high command. The walls shook daily with the impact of Soviet artillery, yet he clung to delusion. He issued orders to phantom divisions, demanded counterattacks from armies that no longer existed, and spoke of salvation through miracle weapons and imaginary alliances. Around him, Berlin disintegrated. Bridges collapsed, power failed, and the once grand avenues of the capital were reduced to piles of dust and twisted steel. Civilians huddled in basements, listening to the endless rumble of bombardment. Children wore paper armbands, declaring them part of the Volkssturm, the people's militia, their rifles too large for their hands, their helmets slipping over frightened eyes. On April 16, 1945, the Soviets struck. It was called the Battle of the Seelow Heights, the gateway to Berlin. For days, Zhukov's guns poured over 1 million shells into German positions. The night sky turned white with fire. The ground shook for miles. When the Red Army finally advanced, they met desperate resistance. SS units, paratroopers, and exhausted Wehrmacht remnants fighting from trenches and villages. The cost was staggering, but the Soviet tide could not be stopped. By April 20th, Hitler's birthday, Soviet artillery shells were landing in the center of Berlin. The city of the Führer was now under siege. Inside Berlin, chaos became routine. The Luftwaffe no longer flew. The once mighty Wehrmacht had fractured into fragments. Tanks fought from intersections, artillery fired point-blank down boulevards, and snipers haunted the ruins. The Soviet advance was relentless, block by block, house by house. Women and children fled through cellars. Fires consumed entire districts. The Red Army, hardened and enraged, showed little mercy. To them, every building was a fortress, every German uniform a symbol of the suffering inflicted upon their homeland. The German defenders fought with the fury of despair. SS troops, Hitler Youth, police units, and civilians armed with little more than Panzerfausts and faith. They were fighting not for victory, but for the illusion of it. As the front lines closed in, the psychological collapse within the bunker deepened. Hitler's voice, once thunderous, now trembled. Reports of betrayal filled the air. He screamed at his generals, accused them of cowardice, of treason, of failing him. Outside, the city burned. Inside, reality dissolved. On April 22nd, Hitler admitted for the first time that the war was lost. 2 days later, he married Eva Braun in a brief, hollow ceremony. By April 30th, Soviet troops were within blocks of the Chancellery. That afternoon, as artillery thundered overhead, Hitler and Braun retreated into a small room, said a few quiet words, and took their own lives. The man who had promised 1,000 years of empire was gone, his dream reduced to ashes. The fighting did not stop immediately. The battle raged for 2 more days as German forces surrendered piecemeal or were annihilated where they stood. On May 2nd, 1945, Berlin officially fell. Soviet soldiers raised the red banner over the Reichstag, a moment immortalized in a photograph that came to define the war's end. The city was unrecognizable. Its streets flooded, its monuments shattered, its people starving. Nearly 300,000 soldiers and over 100,000 civilians had died in the final battle. The cost was immeasurable, yet in that ruin the world found its end to tyranny. The Reich was no more. In the aftermath, the victors walked through a city of ghosts. The silence that followed was heavy, not with triumph but with exhaustion. The Soviets, who had endured the worst horrors of the war, wept and saluted the dead. The Allies, learning of Hitler's death, felt no joy, only relief. The nightmare had ended, but at a price that could never truly be paid. The Battle of Berlin was not a victory in the traditional sense. It was an ending, the closing act of a tragedy that had consumed tens of millions. In its ashes, a new world would be born, divided by ideology, haunted by memory, and defined by the ruins of this one. The streets of Berlin today bear no scars of that inferno, but beneath them lie the bones of an empire, and the memory of its fall. The city that once symbolized power and dominance now stands as a monument to survival, to reconstruction, and to the cost of human ambition gone mad. Tonight we descend once more into those final days, into the bunker and the battlefield, the streets and the ruins, the fear and the final silence. This is the entire story of the Battle of Berlin, the downfall of the Third Reich, the death of tyranny, and the moment when the world emerged from darkness into the uncertain light of peace. Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you tuning in from, and what time is it for you tonight? The winter of 1945 carried a heavy stillness across Europe, as though the air itself held its breath. Cities from Warsaw to Vienna lay in ruins, their broken streets whispering of battles already fought and lost. In Germany, the once proud Reich now staggered, its armies shattered and retreating, its people tired beyond words. Factories produced little more than smoke, trains crawled along broken rails, and fields lay fallow under frost and silence. Yet Berlin remained, the last stronghold at the center of the storm, waiting with walls scarred but still standing. For millions the war had already taken everything, leaving only the hollow rhythm of survival. The streets of Berlin were filled with both fear and resignation, a city of whispers where hope and despair walked side by side. Even in this final winter, life pressed on, candles flickered in cellars, ration lines stretched under grey skies, and footsteps echoed across frozen cobblestones. All around, the great empire that promised 1,000 years now felt like a dream dissolving at dawn. And in that fragile dawn, Berlin stood as the shadowed heart of a war nearly over. The Allies advanced from every direction, their armies pressing relentlessly toward the center. From the west came the Americans, British, and French, sweeping across the Rhine with quiet certainty. From the east came the vast strength of the Soviet Union, a tide of men and machines moving through Poland and toward the Oder River. In Italy, in the Balkans, in northern Germany, the walls closed in. The dream of expansion had turned into the reality of collapse, and each day carried new reports of cities lost and armies broken. Within Berlin, the news traveled quickly, whispered from ear to ear, often hushed to keep the truth from children. People clung to rumors as though they were lifelines, rumors of secret weapons, of miraculous victories, of sudden peace. Yet beneath the surface, most knew the truth. The end was coming, slow and unstoppable, like nightfall after sunset. The once mighty Reich was shrinking into silence, and Berlin was left to carry the final weight. And so, the quiet awareness of an ending settled over the city like mist. Inside homes and shelters, the people of Berlin lived in an uneasy rhythm of waiting. Bread was scarce, coal even scarcer, and families gathered in cold rooms, wrapped in blankets against the chill. Many lived underground, their days marked by the sound of distant artillery and the rattle of air raid sirens. The faces of the young had grown thin, while the elderly wore expressions shaped by both endurance and disbelief. Soldiers limped home on leave, uniforms torn, eyes hollow, speaking less than they once did. Mothers searched for food wherever it could be found, their children clutching their hands with quiet trust. Neighbors shared what little they had, sometimes a piece of bread, sometimes just a word of comfort. In the shadows of broken buildings, there was still laughter now and then, as though life refused to be silenced. Yet always in the background, there lingered the sense of something vast and final moving closer. The people of Berlin felt it in their bones, a weight pressing down that no one could name aloud. The German army, once so proud, now showed only fragments of its old strength. Divisions were shadows of themselves, often composed of exhausted veterans, wounded men returned too soon, and young boys called up before their time. The Reich had mobilized its last reserves, gathering both the very young and the very old into makeshift formations. They drilled with wooden rifles, practiced in empty courtyards, and were told they would save their nation. In truth, many carried little more than hope and despair in equal measure. On the front lines, soldiers heard the thunder of Soviet guns rolling closer each week. Letters home spoke of fear, of exhaustion, and of the quiet wish that it all might end. Even the officers who once shouted commands with certainty now spoke in lowered voices, as if unwilling to break the fragile silence that held them together. Yet despite the crumbling of armies, orders still came from above, demanding that Berlin be defended to the last. And so the soldiers waited, watching the horizon where storm clouds gathered. In the government offices, denial reigned even as the walls closed in. Leaders spoke of victory, while reports of defeat piled higher each day. Maps showed advancing red arrows that no longer could be ignored, but official voices still promised deliverance. Speeches echoed with confidence that had long since drained away from the people listening. Secret meetings grew more frantic, decisions more desperate, and loyalty more uncertain. Still, those at the top clung to their illusions, while those below braced for reality. Within the labyrinth of power, silence and secrecy became the strongest currencies. Yet in every whispered conversation, in every unspoken glance, the truth remained: Berlin would soon face its reckoning. The city that had once proclaimed the future now stood trembling on the edge of its own destruction. And in those corridors of power, even the strongest words could not hold back what was coming. The city itself bore the marks of exhaustion. Streets were filled with rubble, buildings burned and patched again, windows covered with wood and cloth. Public squares that once hosted parades now lay deserted, save for weary soldiers and scavenging birds. Statues of triumph stood surrounded by silence, their meaning hollowed by the war's weight. Railway stations were crowded with refugees, carrying all they owned in bundles and sacks. Bomb craters became part of the landscape, reminders of nights spent hiding underground. Shops displayed empty shelves, their windows frosted with dust rather than goods. Yet still, life carried on. Markets opened, bakeries baked what little flour they had, and trams rattled along their battered tracks. Children played in the ruins, their laughter rising strangely against the broken stone. Through all this, the city seemed to wait, like a stage prepared for a final act that no one wished to perform. Beyond the physical ruins lay the deeper wounds of spirit. The people of Berlin had lived through years of war, and the strain had etched itself into their hearts. Many had lost fathers, brothers, and sons to distant battlefields, names now carved on wooden crosses far from home. Some had seen friends vanish in the night, taken by the very regime that claimed to protect them. Others bore the silent guilt of having believed too strongly, or of having stayed silent too long. These thoughts rarely found voice, but they lingered heavy and unspoken. As the city darkened under its final winter, there was a sense that history itself was passing judgment. Each day carried both the memory of past glories and the ache of present losses. Berlin, once a symbol of ambition, was now a mirror of collapse, and the people, each in their own way, felt the reflection growing sharper. Yet even in this darkness there remained flickers of resilience. Families still gathered around faint candlelight, telling stories to comfort their children. Soldiers still stood watch, however weary, keeping faith with duty, even when faith in victory was gone. Neighbors still offered kindness, sometimes no more than a word, sometimes a crust of bread. Musicians, when they could, played softly in hidden corners, notes drifting like fragile threads of hope. Teachers still taught lessons to children in makeshift classrooms, words rising above the sound of distant guns. And in the quiet moments, some still believed in survival beyond the ruins. They imagined a time when the war would be over, when gardens would grow again, and laughter would return. These small acts became the city's heartbeat, faint but persistent. They were the final proof that Berlin was more than stone and soldiers, more than maps and battles. And in that quiet persistence, the city prepared to face its fate. The shadow of the Reich stretched long across the winter of 1945, a shadow not of triumph, but of ending. Every passing day seemed to draw the curtain closer, though no one could say how quickly it would fall. The world beyond Berlin was already moving on, already imagining a future after the war. Yet within the city, time itself seemed suspended, stretched thin between dread and waiting. In the east, the thunder of Soviet guns grew louder, promising that the stillness would soon be broken. In the west, the Allies watched with patient caution, letting the city drift toward its collapse. Between them, Berlin stood alone, a fortress without walls, a capital without strength. The empire it represented was already fading into history, leaving only echoes, and in those echoes lay both silence and forewarning, a calm before a storm that could not be held back. The shadows deepened, and the story moved quietly toward its next chapter. The snow along the Vistula River had only just begun to melt when the Red Army gathered its strength. Behind them lay Poland, scarred by years of occupation, and ahead stretched the path to Berlin. Millions of soldiers stood in their ranks, clothed in heavy coats, and burdened with the silence of long campaigns. Tanks lined the roads like sleeping giants, their engines waiting for the order to awaken. Artillery stretched to the horizon, black silhouettes against a pale winter sky. The great armies of Zhukov and Konev were no longer just lines on a map, but living rivers of men and steel. Each day brought new supplies, new soldiers, and the quiet hum of preparation. Officers spoke in measured tones, their voices low, their words deliberate, for all knew what was at stake. The war was entering its final chapter, though few could predict the shape of its last pages, and in that hushed expectancy, the storm gathered momentum. The Vistula Order offensive began with a roar, though to those who watched from a distance, it seemed like a tide swelling silently across the plains. Soviet divisions surged westward, moving with a speed that startled even themselves. Towns that had once seemed immovable, strongholds crumbled quickly under their advance. German soldiers, already weary and scattered, could do little to resist the pressure of entire fronts converging. Bridges fell, railways were seized, and the great arteries of German defense were cut one by one. Civilians fled along frozen roads, carts creaking, voices muffled by cold winds and fear. The Red Army pressed on, carrying with them the memory of their own suffering, determined to bring the war to its end. They were not just fighting for land, but for the echo of every village and city lost in the east. The inevitability of their momentum was felt even in the stillness of Berlin, and with each passing day, the distance between the Soviets and the German capital grew smaller. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, commanding the First Belarusian Front, carried himself with the quiet weight of expectation. He had led his men through fire and loss, and now his gaze was fixed firmly on Berlin. To the south, Marshal Ivan Konev prepared his first Ukrainian front, equally determined, equally relentless. Both men had risen from humble beginnings, forged into iron by war and hardship. Their rivalry was whispered about, a silent competition that pushed each to drive faster, harder, closer to the prize. Stalin, watching from Moscow, encouraged this contest, believing it would bring victory more swiftly. Orders flowed outward like currents, shaping the movements of millions, binding them to a single goal. Behind the grand designs lay simple truths. Men walked through snow, women worked in factories, families waited in silence. History often appears as grand strokes, yet it is lived in footsteps and whispers, and in those footsteps, Berlin became more than a destination, it became destiny. By January 1945, the Oder River was reached, and the heart of Germany lay only a short distance beyond. The speed of the advance astonished even seasoned commanders, who had not imagined such progress in weeks that felt like days. The frozen river seemed to mark a threshold between two worlds. Behind, the long path of struggle. Ahead, the final confrontation. Soldiers gazed across its icy waters with both weariness and anticipation, knowing that Berlin lay less than 100 kilometers away. The land between the Oder and the capital seemed close enough to touch, yet filled with unseen obstacles. German defenses were still formidable, despite their weakness, and the Soviet command understood the difficulty of the last steps. Plans were drawn in quiet rooms, pencils scratching across maps, lit by dim lamps. Every road, every bridge, every forest was measured and considered with care. The storm had carried them far, but its last strike would need precision as well as power. And so the Soviets paused, holding their breath before the plunge. For the people of Germany, the Soviet advance was both a whisper of fear and the drumbeat of inevitability. Rumors spread faster than armies, stories of what had happened in the east drifting westward. Families listened in silence, hearts heavy with dread, wondering what the coming weeks would bring. Refugees clogged the roads, carrying their lives in bundles, their voices muffled by the shuffle of endless footsteps. Some hoped to flee to the west, where the Americans and British were said to be more merciful. Others stayed, rooted in place by age, by loyalty, or simply by the impossibility of leaving. In Berlin, the news of Soviet victories arrived as murmurs that grew louder each day. Shops displayed maps with shifting lines, though the truth was already clear to all who looked. The encirclement was not only of armies, but of an entire people, and within that tightening ring, the weight of fate grew heavier with every sunrise. Among the Soviet soldiers themselves, the advance carried more than strategy. It carried memory. Many had seen their villages burned, their families lost, their friends buried in distant fields. The march westward was not only a mission of conquest, but a journey of return through grief. Each step carried both pride and pain, and each victory was touched with remembrance. Songs drifted through camps at night, voices rising softly against the winter air, songs of home, of longing, of survival. Fires burned low, meals were simple, but the sense of purpose was unshakable. Letters home spoke not of glory, but of endurance, of the wish to live beyond the war. These human currents flowed beneath the vast machinery of armies, invisible but unbreakable, and in their quiet strength, the Soviets found the resolve to keep pressing forward. The storm outside mirrored the storm within, a storm that carried them ever closer to Berlin. In the German High Command, alarm grew as the Soviet tide advanced with unstoppable force. Reports arrived daily, describing positions lost, units scattered, and civilians fleeing westward. Hitler remained defiant, speaking of counterattacks that no longer existed in reality. His generals exchanged glances heavy with doubt, yet the machinery of orders and commands continued. The illusion of control held for a time, but even in silence the truth was felt. The Reich was shrinking by the hour, collapsing under pressure it could no longer withstand. In the offices of Berlin, maps filled with red arrows seemed to tighten like a noose. Each report was another thread in the encirclement, another signal of the approaching storm. The calm language of strategy could not disguise the urgency of survival, and in those rooms of power, unease spread like a quiet fire. By February, the outlines of the final confrontation had become clear. The Soviets held the Oder, their armies preparing for the last push that would bring them to Berlin's gates. The Allies in the West paused, waiting, letting the eastern tide roll forward unhindered. Stalin's intention was plain. The Red Army would seize Berlin, and in doing so, shape the future to come. Soldiers sharpened their bayonets, not for glory, but for the duty of finishing what had begun years before. Civilians dug trenches, built shelters, and whispered prayers beneath their breath. The city itself, still untouched by the final storm, braced as if sensing the thunder on the horizon. The circle was not yet closed, but the arc of its shadow already touched Berlin's walls. History leaned forward, poised on the threshold of its conclusion. And as winter melted into spring, the calm of planning yielded to the inevitability of the storm. Berlin, the capital of a fading empire, was declared a fortress by order of Adolf Hitler. The words carried a hollow weight, for the city was already weary, its streets scarred and its people worn thin. Yet the command demanded that every stone, every corner, every wall be turned into a barrier against the coming tide. Barricades were raised from broken bricks, sandbags, and wreckage pulled from ruined houses. Trenches were dug across avenues where trams once rattled, their iron tracks now serving as makeshift defenses. Bridges were prepared for demolition, ready to collapse into the rivers at a moment's notice. The city was being reshaped not for life, but for resistance. A grim transformation whispered about by its people. They watched silently as their home became an armed maze, knowing the futility of what was being built. Still the work continued, driven not by hope but by command. And within this forced labor, the last defenses of Berlin slowly took form. The Volkssturm, the people's militia, embodied both tragedy and desperation. Boys barely in their teens stood in ill-fitting uniforms, rifles often older than themselves. Alongside them were men in their 50s and 60s, faces lined by years of labor rather than military discipline. Many carried weapons that belonged to another age, some dating back to the Great War, heavy and unreliable. Training was brief, sometimes no more than a few hours, and discipline was more imagined than real. Yet they were expected to face seasoned armies hardened by years of relentless war. Their oaths were spoken with trembling voices, their marches uneven and slow. Mothers and daughters watched them pass with hearts heavy, torn between pride and fear. They were soldiers in name only, drawn not from strength but from exhaustion. And in their fragile ranks, the surreal character of Berlin's last defense revealed itself. Even the remnants of the regular army carried the weight of hopelessness. Divisions that once thundered across Europe now numbered only hundreds, patched together from survivors of other battles. Officers spoke bravely, but their eyes betrayed an understanding that this was not a fight they could win. Supplies dwindled, ammunition counted in handfuls, fuel measured in drops, rations more memory than reality. Tanks, when they appeared, often rolled on worn tracks, held together with makeshift repairs, yet orders from above demanded that these men fight on, as though defiance itself might alter destiny. Some still believed in duty, clinging to a soldier's code that outlasted victory. Others moved through their tasks with the quiet numbness of inevitability. The city accepted them not as saviors, but as shadows of what had once been, and in their weary presence, the stage for the final act grew clearer. Hitler's voice echoed through decrees, filled with demands that Berlin must never fall. He spoke of turning the capital into a bastion, a symbol of resistance that would inspire the nation. Yet his words were delivered from the underground corridors of the bunker, far from the streets where soldiers and citizens struggled. The commands he issued bore little connection to the realities above. Maps marked with bold lines ignored the thin ranks who would hold them. Promises of reinforcements rarely materialized, leaving defenders with only silence in their place. Still, loyalty bound many to obedience, even when reason faltered. Officers repeated the orders with firm voices, though doubt lingered in their eyes. The fortress was more a symbol than a reality, a declaration against the inevitability that pressed closer each day. And so, the city was asked to bear a burden greater than it could carry. In workshops and factories, the last efforts of an exhausted nation echoed through the clang of tools. Workers toiled with little light, shaping weapons from scrap, piecing together machines from remnants. Women bent over benches, sewing uniforms for boys who had never held a rifle. Children delivered messages, carried parcels, and performed the smallest tasks that made them feel part of the struggle. The sound of hammers and saws filled the air, mingling with the distant rumble of approaching guns. These efforts spoke not of strength, but of necessity, a patchwork of survival held together by command. Supplies trickled in from the countryside, but they were too few, too late, too fragile. Yet, even in futility, hands continued their work, for the habit of obedience was strong. The city's breath was measured by this labor, each strike of iron a beat against silence, and with each beat, the storm drew closer. The defenses of Berlin extended into the hearts of its people, shaping their days in strange and heavy ways. Families were ordered to prepare shelters, cellars transformed into bunkers of hope and fear. Streets became obstacles rather than pathways, every familiar corner now part of a battlefield in waiting. Posters urged courage, speeches demanded sacrifice, and silence answered in return. Children played among the sandbags, unaware of the full weight of what was coming. Elderly men recalled wars past, shaking their heads at the sight of history repeating itself. The city lived between normality and unreality, where shops still opened yet survival itself was in question. Each day carried the rhythm of ordinary life and the echo of something extraordinary approaching. In that fragile balance, Berlin braced itself for the inevitable. And in that bracing, the last defences found their true form, not walls or weapons, but endurance itself. The atmosphere grew heavier as spring approached, carrying with it both renewal and dread. Buds appeared on trees along the avenues, fragile signs of life against a backdrop of barricades. Markets filled with the scents of early vegetables, though hunger remained stronger than abundance. Children's laughter still rang out in quiet courtyards, but it was softer now, as though even joy had learned to whisper. Soldiers marched with stiff steps, their shadows stretching long across cobbled streets. The people of Berlin moved through their days as though caught in a dream, part real and part illusion. They saw defences rising around them, but they also saw the emptiness behind them. Hope flickered, faint as a candle in wind, easily snuffed but stubborn in its glow. The city carried both despair and determination, a paradox of survival at the edge of collapse. And within this paradox, Berlin's fate continued to unfold. The concept of a fortress was meant to inspire, but it often deepened the silence instead. Those who built the barricades knew they could not stop what was coming. Those who stood guard on bridges understood the rivers could not hold back armies. Yet still, the work was done, and the watch was kept, for no one could refuse the current of command. The streets grew stranger each day, more a battlefield than a home, yet the people walked them as though they always had. In whispered voices, they wondered how long the walls could stand, and how long they themselves could endure. Some believed the Allies in the west might come first, sparing them the storm from the east. Others resigned themselves to the thought that the city would be broken before it could be saved. The fortress was less a promise than a waiting place, a pause before the inevitable, and in that waiting, the calm before the storm deepened. The eastern horizon in April 1945 was alive with rumbling echoes that rolled endlessly across the fields of Brandenburg. The Red Army had gathered in numbers so vast that the land itself seemed to groan under their weight. Tanks stood in lines like metallic beasts, their steel hides glinting under uncertain skies. Soldiers, hardened by years of brutal campaigning, prepared silently, each man aware that the final prize was only a short march away. The Oder River, swollen by spring, marked the last natural barrier before the German capital. Across the water, remnants of a once mighty army clung to battered earthworks, their resolve outlasting their strength. Hitler had ordered them to hold, and so they stayed, weary yet defiant. For 3 days the ground shook with artillery that never ceased, as shells churned the landscape into dust and smoke. The air itself seemed to pulse with anticipation, carrying the listener into the heart of a world about to fracture. In this pounding rhythm of war, the first cracks of Germany's final line began to appear, leading us softly onward. The Seelow heights rose gently above the plain, a ridge that promised shelter but offered only a thin illusion of defense. It was here that German commanders placed their hopes, stringing barbed wire and laying mines with desperate precision. Yet for every trench dug, 1,000 Soviet guns were already trained upon them. The bombardment began before dawn, a storm of sound and fury that turned darkness into a shifting sea of light. Men crouched in dugouts, their ears ringing, their thoughts drifting between loyalty and despair. Villages nearby trembled as glass shattered in windows and roofs crumbled beneath the pressure of air alone. Soviet soldiers waited behind the barrage, their faces lit intermittently by the blaze above, their hands gripping weapons with silent patience. When the order came to advance, It was less a cheer than a collective exhalation, the release of tension built over years of suffering. Step by step they moved through smoke and soil, while German defenders strained against the tide. And in this measured advance, the line of defense that had seemed immovable began to dissolve like sand under the weight of water. The battle was not swift, for men on both sides fought with the last measure of strength they carried. German officers tried to rally their forces, pointing toward the capital, as if its very image could stiffen faltering resolve. Young boys of the Volkssturm and aged veterans of older wars stood together in shallow pits, their rifles clutched with trembling hands. Yet against them came waves of soldiers in coordinated ranks, their advance relentless, their determination hardened by loss, endured from Stalingrad to Kursk. Tanks churned through mud, smashing what obstacles remained, while aircraft swept overhead, like dark birds crossing the pale sky. Each burst of fire left the air thick with the acrid scent of smoke and cordite, mingling with the earthy dampness of the spring soil. Still, the German defenders refused to vanish, holding corners of villages, clinging to barns and hedgerows. For every push, there was a brief pause, a reminder that even the strongest storm meets moments of stillness. But with each hour, the balance shifted, and the heights that had once seemed formidable shrank into fragile ridges of dust. And as the ridge fell, so too did the last belief that Berlin could remain untouched. Behind the advancing lines, Soviet commanders Zhukov and Konev moved their armies with precision born of rivalry as much as duty. Both men sought to be the one whose flag would be raised over the heart of Hitler's city. Their staffs traced movements on maps, pencils scratching like whispers in the dim glow of lanterns, while outside, men gave their bodies to turn plans into reality. Stalin's orders were clear. Berlin must fall quickly, decisively, and completely. The Soviet people had suffered for years, and this final act was to be both vengeance and redemption. Roads clogged with supply trucks, endless columns stretching back as far as the eye could wander. Horses pulled wagons of ammunition where engines failed, their hooves beating steady rhythms into the earth. At every crossing, guards directed the tide of humanity and machinery toward a single destination. And in that steady flow, there was a sense that history itself was being funneled into one final confrontation. The narrowing focus of armies carried the story closer to the gates of Berlin. For civilians caught near the Oder, the days were filled with trembling uncertainty. Families huddled in basements, the walls shaking with every distant blast, their lamps flickering like small stars in the gloom. Mothers hushed children with soft words, though fear lingered in every pause between sentences. Some tried to flee westward, pulling carts piled with blankets and food, hoping to escape into zones yet untouched. Others remained, bound to their homes by age, exhaustion, or disbelief that the end could truly be at hand. Farmers abandoned their fields, livestock wandering freely across roads now claimed by soldiers. Smoke curled into the air from villages left burning behind the front lines, drifting lazily into skies that seemed indifferent to the suffering below. Rumors spread faster than truth, stories of the Red Army magnified by fear, stories of German heroism exaggerated by propaganda. Yet in every whisper, the common thread was that the world once known was slipping away. The Oder, once a river of commerce and life, had become a border between survival and collapse, and through its waters the final storm now passed. As night fell on the heights, the thunder of artillery did not fade, but rolled endlessly, as if the earth itself had chosen never to rest. Fires burned across the ridges, casting an eerie glow that made shadows dance on shattered walls. Soldiers on both sides lay in silence where they fell, their companions pressing onward with tired eyes and heavy steps. The air carried the tang of iron and smoke, a reminder of the price that each meter of ground demanded. For the Soviets, the victory was certain, but not without cost, each advance purchased with exhaustion and grief. For the Germans, the defense became hollow, their lines bending and breaking like brittle twigs under an unyielding weight. Commands grew frantic, orders contradicted, and maps lost meaning as positions disappeared by the hour. What had begun as structured defense collapsed into fragments of resistance scattered across the fields. Yet even in chaos there was a strange calm, the quiet acceptance that the storm could not be turned back, and in that calm the road to Berlin lay wide open. In the days that followed, the Soviets pushed beyond the Oder, leaving broken defenses behind like abandoned shells upon the shore. Towns along the way became waypoints in the march, each one falling swiftly as columns pressed ever westward. Bridges were seized or rebuilt, rivers crossed with efficiency that spoke of long preparation. Supply lines stretched but held, feeding the endless appetite of advancing divisions. Civilians peered from ruined houses, watching the flow of men and machines like an unstoppable current. German stragglers surrendered in small groups, their weapons discarded, their eyes dulled by resignation. Others vanished into forests, ghosts waiting for a war already decided. Each day carried the Soviets closer, each mile shrinking the distance between their armies and the capital. The sound of guns no longer seemed distant, but constant, a low hum beneath every breath, and as Berlin's outline drew nearer, the story flowed toward the city's heart. For Hitler, the loss of the Oder line was a wound from which no recovery was possible. Yet in his underground chambers, words of victory still echoed, orders still demanded impossible feats. Maps on the walls showed lines of defense that no longer existed, colored arrows pointing toward dreams already erased by reality. Officers nodded silently, carrying out commands they knew could not be fulfilled. In the echoing corridors, loyalty and fear intertwined, binding men to a fate they could no longer escape. Berlin was declared a fortress, though its gates had already been opened by the defeat at Seelow Heights. The city prepared for its final ordeal, streets filled with the sound of shovels and the clatter of hasty barricades. To the east, Soviet divisions pressed closer, their momentum unbroken, their path cleared by the breaking of the Oder line. The end was no longer a shadow, but a certainty walking step by step toward the heart of Germany. And with this knowledge, the listener is carried gently into the story of Berlin itself, waiting in silence for the storm to arrive. Berlin's streets were quieter now, yet the quiet carried a weight heavier than any sound. Families moved slowly through corridors of collapsed buildings, carrying only what they could hold. Cellars became homes, kitchens became shelters, and the rhythm of life adjusted to the shadows. Mothers whispered to children, voices soft as winter snow, teaching courage that was measured more in endurance than triumph. The smell of damp earth and faint smoke filled these underground spaces, mingling with the warmth of shared blankets. Outside, the city held its breath, as distant rumble hinted at armies yet to arrive. Shops were empty, yet hands still reached for supplies in a gentle ritual of survival. Neighbors offered small gestures of comfort, a loaf of bread, a cup of tea, a word spoken carefully. Even in silence, the life of the city persisted, fragile yet unwavering, and through that persistence the quiet pulse of Berlin remained unbroken, guiding its people forward. Children wandered through rubble with wide eyes, learning the new geography of a city they once knew. They traced the outlines of homes now half collapsed, stepping over broken stones and debris as if navigating a strange landscape of a dream. Toys left in corners were dusty, yet sometimes picked up, a faint reminder of days when laughter was unburdened. Their questions were simple, yet full of weight. When would father return? When would school begin? When would the noise stop? Adults answered with soft smiles, often more to calm themselves than the children. Windows framed views of grey skies and distant smoke, a constant reminder of the fragile boundary between routine and chaos. Evenings brought quiet meals, conversations muted to avoid disturbing neighbors. The city itself seemed to lean closer, as though listening to every whispered exchange. And in the rhythm of daily survival, the children learned lessons no classroom could teach, guided by the soft constancy of human care. The heartbeat of life continued, delicate yet unyielding. Women in Berlin moved with a blend of care and calculation, balancing the routines of home with preparations for the inevitable. They boiled water, repaired clothing, and gathered supplies for days that might never come. Their hands were steady, even when hearts trembled, shaping small acts of resilience that kept families grounded. Letters were written with careful words, meant to reassure distant relatives and preserve hope, however tenuous. Meals were shared quietly, stories told softly, as if volume itself could awaken fear. Some women ventured into streets rarely, fetching essentials from markets where shelves held little but memories. They remembered the city as it once was, its vibrancy faded yet lingering in the mind like a soft melody. In basements, kitchens, and attics, they built a rhythm of care, a protective song for those around them. The quiet of their labor was a counterpoint to the distant roar of armies, and in their steady persistence, the foundation of survival held the city together. The elderly walked slowly through familiar streets, each step measured and deliberate. They carried memories heavier than any sack of possessions, recollections of wars past and promises broken. Their eyes lingered on facades of buildings that still stood, imagining the laughter and life that had filled them. Conversations were hushed, filled with reflections and gentle warnings to younger generations. They shared lessons of endurance, of patience, of knowing when to bend rather than break. Though their bodies were frail, their minds remained sharp, tracing the rhythm of the city as if it could guide them safely. Even in fear, they found ways to contribute, watching children, mending clothing, offering words of comfort. Their presence was a bridge between past and present, a quiet anchor in a world in motion. And as they moved, the city seemed to settle around them, listening and remembering. The long gaze of experience carried Berlin into its next hours. The days passed in a rhythm dictated by necessity rather than time. Families rose early to gather water, to collect firewood, to make small repairs to their shelters. Meals were simple, often shared with neighbors who became companions in this delicate endurance. Conversations were layered with silence, each pause holding as much meaning as words themselves. Sounds of distant artillery were noted, but rarely discussed, a quiet acknowledgement of forces beyond control. Evening brought reflection, where prayers were whispered and hands held tightly. The routines themselves became comforting, a rhythm that countered the instability surrounding them. Children slept beneath blankets, while adults listened to the subtle creaks of the building settling, a reminder of both fragility and continuity. Every act, no matter how small, contributed to a sense of life persisting amid uncertainty. And through these daily rituals, Berlin's civilians carved out space for calm within the storm. Letters and messages carried the voices of hope across distance and danger. Young men far from home, stationed in the fractured remains of the army, received words written with care, read aloud to sustain courage. Friends and family exchanged news in whispers, careful not to alarm those nearby. Notes traveled through channels improvised by necessity, carried by those who moved cautiously through the streets. Each letter contained not only information, but the soft insistence that life continued, that someone remembered, that someone cared. Even amid scarcity, words were treasured, folded and reread, until the paper grew thin and soft. These gestures, small and deliberate, were acts of resilience more powerful than any weapon. They held the pulse of connection between souls separated by conflict and fear. And as these messages crossed the city, the quiet network of humanity grew stronger, threading through cellars and hallways alike. The heart of Berlin beat in these silent exchanges. The city itself seemed to participate in the endurance of its inhabitants. Trees along streets offered soft shade in warmer hours, their leaves whispering with the wind. Cats and dogs moved carefully among rubble, companions to those who sought comfort in small creatures. Rivers, though crossed and bridged by armies, flowed quietly, their gentle current a constant amid upheaval. Birds sang softly in hidden corners, melodies that rose above the hum of distant artillery. Even the stones of streets, worn smooth by decades, seemed to remember footsteps and voices, carrying echoes of life through the city. Windows cracked and dusted, framed views of neighbors tending to gardens or checking supplies. Life persisted in small, unassuming ways, a quiet insistence against the encroaching storm, and in the rhythm of city and people, a strange harmony took hold, a gentle signal that survival remained possible. Through these natural currents, Berlin held its breath, ready for the next chapter. As night fell, families huddled close in shelters that had become homes. Soft lamps cast golden pools of light, flickering across tired faces. Stories were told quietly, lullabies hummed, hands held firmly in the warmth of proximity. The city outside rested in muted expectation, its streets empty yet alive with memory and possibility. Wind whispered through broken windows, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant smoke. Children drifted to sleep, comforted by routine and the closeness of those they trusted. Adults reflected on the day, marking the passing of time in tasks completed and meals shared. Even amidst uncertainty, there was a sense of continuity, a thread of calm woven through hours of tension. And as the city settled into night, the quiet heartbeat of its people carried forward, guiding the story gently toward what was to come. The hushed voices of Berlin whispered their endurance into the darkness. The first Soviet soldiers crossed into Berlin's outskirts with quiet determination, their boots pressing softly on streets that had once known laughter and daily routine. Gardens where children had played were now lines of movement, carefully measured by officers who understood the rhythm of advance. Canals that reflected sunlight now mirrored the shadow of uniformed men, gliding past with silent focus. Rows of houses, familiar and comforting, became markers of territory, their walls whispering stories of the families that still lingered inside. Flowers bloomed stubbornly in yards, unheeding of the men moving methodically along the avenues. The air carried the faint scent of damp earth, mingled with smoke, and the iron tang of distant shells. Civilians watched cautiously, crouched in basements or behind shutters, listening more than speaking. Even in the quiet, there was an awareness that nothing would remain quite the same. Streets transformed slowly, subtly, into passages of purpose rather than leisure, and with each measured step, the city felt the first ripple of a tide that would soon engulf it. Officers guided columns along narrow lanes, noting every turn, every crossing, every potential obstacle. Soviet engineers followed closely, clearing debris or reinforcing weak structures to allow safe passage. Soldiers paused at intersections, glancing at the windows of homes where families hid, eyes meeting eyes in silent acknowledgement of shared vulnerability. Even as the tide pressed forward, there was restraint, a deliberate pacing that reflected discipline and caution. Gardens became temporary fortifications, hedges now serving as barriers, fences as points of observation. Canals slowed some advances, yet bridges were used efficiently, their wood groaning softly under weight. The rhythm of movement was almost musical, measured and steady, carrying the weight of both history and necessity. Every step forward reshaped the familiar contours of the neighborhood into something new, a geography of strategy rather than memory. And though the city's transformation was eerie, it unfolded with a quiet inevitability, a slow turning of reality toward confrontation. The tide advanced gently, yet with unstoppable force. Amid these streets, civilians adjusted to the surreal reality around them. Mothers held children tightly as they watched soldiers pass, hands trembling but faces calm. Elders guided the young through hidden paths, whispering instructions, teaching the lessons of discretion and patience. Pets wandered carefully, sensing the altered rhythm of human activity. Windows once open to sunlight were shuttered to keep the world at bay, while doors remained closed but remembered their original purpose. Voices carried softly in basements and cellars, speaking in quiet tones that rose above the ambient tension without breaking it. Even in uncertainty, the act of observation became a form of survival, a way to understand the city's new cadence. Familiar streets no longer offered comfort, yet their shapes and angles guided those who knew them best. And as each house and garden became a waypoint in the unfolding tide, the city seemed to bend slowly under the presence of the advancing army. The quiet intrusion reshaped Berlin into a landscape of both memory and strategy. Soviet engineers worked alongside the spearheads, their hands steady as they repaired walls or removed obstacles. Rubble was moved deliberately, pathways cleared with care to allow the passage of troops and vehicles alike. Bridges were reinforced, canals navigated with precision, and streets catalogued in the minds of those moving through them. Even familiar landmarks were now touched by the logic of advance, their presence acknowledged yet repurposed in the service of progress. Soldiers stepped lightly over thresholds, marking the space as secured without haste or exuberance. Gardens and courtyards that had been private sanctuaries were now temporary staging areas, their calm surfaces contrasting with the weight of movement above. Civilians watched quietly, recognizing the inevitability of change, feeling both fear and the faint relief that no sudden chaos erupted. The streets became arteries of careful motion, carrying both history and the promise of arrival. And in this slow transformation, the tide maintained a rhythm that was steady, relentless, and strangely hypnotic. Berlin's familiar contours adapted silently to a new order. Even in the city's heart, everyday life persisted in small, delicate ways. Families moved quietly between safe spaces, sharing food and warmth where they could. Children learned to navigate the altered streets, careful not to attract attention yet finding their own small freedoms in hidden corners. Elders recalled old routines, repeating them softly as a reminder of normalcy despite upheaval. Pets continued to follow their owners, instinct guiding them through pathways of rubble and hedges. Doors were opened only when necessary, windows peered through cautiously, and voices remained hushed. These small acts of living became both resistance and solace, a way to assert continuity in a world being rewritten around them. Even as the red tide moved steadily inward, the pulse of human presence continued beneath its flow. And in these quiet interludes, the city held onto fragments of its former self, preserving them like fragile treasure. The tide did not erase, but it reshaped the canvas of life with soft inevitability. The soldiers themselves moved with awareness, balancing purpose with restraint. Each step was taken with attention to the urban terrain, every alleyway and canal considered carefully. Temporary pauses allowed reconnaissance, observation, and understanding, rather than hasty occupation. Their actions were methodical, almost meditative, blending precision with patience. Gardens were crossed gently, fences negotiated without unnecessary force. Canals were navigated with care, as if acknowledging the history they divided. The city's rhythms were respected, even as they were altered, creating a strange harmony between movement and stillness. Soldiers became part of the landscape, moving as one with the terrain rather than over it, and in this quiet discipline, the advance maintained both inevitability and grace. Berlin's neighborhoods yielded step by step, transformed without haste. By the second day, the city's edges were thoroughly entered, yet no chaos overtook its residents. The streets were altered, their usual patterns now guides for navigation and control. Shops remained closed, their doors shuttered, yet the familiar signage offered a whisper of life before the tide. Gardens, once private, were catalogued and noted, their boundaries respected but repurposed for movement. Canals reflected the overcast sky and the disciplined columns passing beside them, water undisturbed by unnecessary haste. Civilians moved quietly, shadows among shadows, their routines adapting with surprising fluidity. The air carried faint smells of earth and distant fires, mingling in a way that was both alarming and ordinary. Even in observation, life persisted, a soft thread woven through the urban advance. And as the tide continued its careful push, Berlin seemed to breathe slowly, accommodating its intruders with subdued inevitability. The city's transformation was profound, yet measured, carrying all who remained into a new reality. As evening fell, the city settled into a fragile rhythm of anticipation. Streets that had felt empty now bore traces of movement, footsteps soft against cobbled stones. Gardens glimmered in the fading light, their tranquility contrasting with the silent march of soldiers. Canals reflected dim skies and passing shapes, offering continuity amid alteration. Civilians huddled in safe corners, listening to the ebb and flow of distant activity. Doors and windows framed quiet scenes of adjustment, families observing the tide with patience and care. Even as the Red Army pressed inward, the life of Berlin persisted, delicate and deliberate. Each night became a marker of endurance, each breath a quiet assertion of survival. And through this evening, the city embraced both change and persistence, flowing gently into the hours that would follow. The tide entered fully, yet the heart of Berlin continued to beat softly. The city streets had become a quiet labyrinth, each alleyway and courtyard a pathway measured by careful observation. Soldiers moved slowly from one building to the next, their progress deliberate, as though time itself had slowed to match their steps. Windows, once portals of domestic life, now framed hushed figures and cautious glances. Walls bore the marks of previous encounters, each crack and dent telling stories of resistance and passage. The rhythm of ordinary days, shops opening, children laughing, birds singing, was suspended, replaced by the measured cadence of movement and watchfulness. Smoke drifted lazily from scattered fires, soft against the grey sky, carrying the scent of wood and dust. Doors opened and closed with precision, sometimes left ajar to signal territory claimed or passed. Even in destruction there was a strange order, a balance held in the steps of those who advanced and those who waited. Civilians watched from hidden corners, learning the contours of a world reshaped overnight. And with each step, the city shifted quietly, its familiar heartbeat now synchronized to the flow of conflict. Floors once worn smooth by years of footsteps now felt fragile under careful weight. Soldiers stepped lightly, mindful of weakened structures and the possibility of collapse. Furniture, overturned and splintered, told of sudden departures, of homes abandoned with little time to gather possessions. Dust floated in beams of muted light, drifting through corridors like soft whispers. Walls etched with memories and photographs held the imprint of countless lives, now softened into background against the pressing task of movement. Windows revealed glimpses of neighbors, faces pale and cautious, their presence acknowledged with silent nods. Gardens were no longer tranquil, but spaces to navigate, hedges forming unexpected boundaries or guides. Even in the midst of the advance, there was a rhythm, a breathing that matched the steps of those moving house by house. The streets were transformed into passageways of patience, and the city itself seemed to bend gently to the course of events. And in this transformation, Berlin revealed both fragility and resilience in quiet measure. Snipers moved with careful intent, their eyes tracing streets, corners, and shadows. Their presence slowed the pace, requiring patience and attention, a careful negotiation of space rather than haste. Soldiers learned to anticipate, to read patterns of movement, to adjust steps to the soft rhythm of vigilance. Walls offered both cover and risk, a delicate balance between concealment and exposure. Streets that once led to schoolyards or markets now guided measured advance, their familiarity reframed by necessity. Even as artillery marked positions further away, the immediate environment demanded attention. Each meter gained earned through observation and caution. The city held memories in its stones, and those who moved through it carried a quiet respect for that history. Each doorway was a threshold, each hallway a brief moment of stillness within a larger movement, and as the tide pressed forward, the residents below held their breaths, their lives intertwined with the soft pulse of passage. The city itself seemed to breathe in tandem with the careful steps of those navigating it. Flamethrowers and other tools of advance were used sparingly, measured and precise, shaping the terrain gently but unavoidably. Buildings were cleared with methodical patience, room by room, corridor by corridor, their walls slowly losing the comfort of domestic life. Civilians who remained tucked themselves into corners, learning the soft rules of survival amid the altered rhythm. The scent of smoke and heated stone mingled in the quiet streets, carrying a muted sense of change rather than terror. Soldiers paused at intersections, noting landmarks, remembering where previous advances had left traces of passage. Footsteps echoed softly against broken tiles and debris, each sound marking progress, not haste. The city adjusted around them, corridors once private becoming passageways, thresholds once personal now communal. Even as destruction reshaped the landscape, the inhabitants found ways to persist quietly. And in this calm observation of transformation, life continued to thread through the urban maze. The measured advance became both a rhythm and a meditation. Windows that once framed ordinary domestic routines now offered glimpses of displacement and endurance. Families crouched low, voices hushed, eyes bright in the dim light of rooms they still called home. Children traced the outlines of furniture, as if remembering its previous use, learning to move with care amid the shifting environment. Walls spoke softly through marks and fractures, telling stories of hurried exits and fleeting presence. Gardens, patios, and courtyards were navigated with caution, each corner potentially shaping the next step. Streets hummed faintly under the careful advance, the echo of boots a steady reminder of both change and continuity. Even in the presence of military movement, small rituals of life endured, soft touches that reminded the city of its own past. And as each building was traversed, each threshold crossed, the pattern of urban life reconfigured slowly under a new cadence. The city itself seemed to pulse gently with measured anticipation. Each room cleared was a quiet marker of the day's passage. Civilians learned to read the soft cues of the advancing tide, moving with patience and discretion. They observed the patterns of footsteps, the shifts in shadow, the pauses that marked a door claimed or passed. Even pets, cautious and wary, adapted to the rhythm of this strange new environment. Meals were prepared quietly, whispers exchanged like fragile threads holding lives together. Clothes were folded, blankets arranged, routines maintained within the narrow confines of what remained. The city offered both shelter and challenge, corridors guiding survival while also bearing witness to disruption. Windows became listening posts, doors thresholds of safety, walls screens of observation, and in the careful observation of these spaces, a gentle rhythm emerged, measured by meters gained and moments endured. Each step, each pause, each breath threaded civilians and soldiers alike into the soft weave of the city. The pulse of Berlin continued quietly, house by house. By evening, the city's quiet had changed shape, its streets mapped now by memory and careful progress. Buildings bore the soft traces of rooms cleared, corridors navigated, spaces transformed from private into passage. Footsteps moved in a measured rhythm, echoing faintly against walls that had once only heard laughter. Shadows stretched long across courtyards and garden walls, blending past and present into a gentle continuum. The air carried the faint scent of dust, stone, and distant fires, subtle but pervasive. Even in displacement, families maintained routines, reading, sewing, whispering, finding small rituals of calm. Soldiers paused at doorways, listening, observing, adjusting, their rhythm synchronized with the city's fragile cadence. And as night fell, the soft hum of quiet endurance rose, threading through apartments, basements, and streets alike. House by house, Berlin was reshaped, not hurriedly, but with deliberate, hypnotic care. The city, fragile and resilient, waited for the next rhythm to arrive. The morning brought renewed movement, gentle yet persistent, as the city yielded gradually to the advancing tide. Soldiers stepped lightly over familiar tiles, doors left behind as thresholds of progress. Dust swirled in the soft light of early sun, mingling with the scent of earth and lingering warmth from hearths, long abandoned. Residents moved through rooms and corridors with delicate care, marking the pace of life within the slow cadence of occupation. Each building offered a new chapter, each hallway a quiet meditation on endurance and adaptation. Windows reflected the pale sky, the movement outside, and the calm persistence within. Even as destruction reshaped spaces, life continued, measured in soft acts of survival and observation. Gardens and courtyards, though altered, remained part of the city's pulse, a reminder of continuity amid change. And in this gentle step-by-step advance, the rhythm of Berlin carried forward, house by house, corridor by corridor. The city held its breath, both altered and enduring, as the story moved quietly onward. Beneath the streets of Berlin, the city's pulse slowed to a hushed rhythm, muffled by layers of concrete and soil. The Führer bunker, once a command center, now felt more like a secluded island in a sea of uncertainty. Corridors stretched narrow and low, lined with walls that absorbed sound and light alike, giving every step a soft, measured weight. Inside, Hitler's circle had shrunk, a handful of men and women moving cautiously, aware that the world above was unraveling with relentless certainty. The air was heavy, carrying the faint scent of paper, ink, and the lingering warmth of bodies confined for long hours. Conversations flowed quietly, tense but subdued, voices soft against the hum of distant artillery. Plans were drawn and erased, mapped and dismissed, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the futility of each strategy. Even tempers, though frayed, expressed themselves in careful tones, restrained by the weight of expectation and fear. The stillness of the bunker was both protective and oppressive, a quiet contrast to the storm pressing the city above, And through this underground world, the listener drifts gently into the intimate heart of Berlin's final command. Maps were spread across tables, edges curling, colored lines showing positions already lost. Officers traced paths with fingertips, their movements deliberate, almost hypnotic, reflecting concentration and quiet despair. Discussions of counterattacks, reserves, and reinforcements unfolded in murmurs, each word carrying more hope than expectation. Outside, the sounds of distant engines and muted explosions formed a constant, low pulse, a reminder of time slipping inexorably away. Each plan, however meticulous, collided softly with reality. The contrast felt like a subtle vibration through the concrete floors. Staff moved with practiced efficiency, carrying messages and adjusting schedules, maintaining a fragile order in the shrinking space. Even in confinement, moments of reflection appeared. A glance at a photograph, a note written and folded with care, a whispered remembrance of a life before the storm. The bunker absorbed these human traces, holding them silently as the world above grew louder. And in this careful, measured movement, the atmosphere remained hypnotic, heavy with anticipation yet calm in its stillness. Life continued quietly, like a muted river beneath the city. Hitler's presence was subdued but commanding, each word weighed with the echo of authority, even as uncertainty clouded the room. His circle responded with careful attention, balancing loyalty and awareness, their gestures soft yet precise. Arguments were contained, discussions polite, yet urgency threaded every statement. The bunker's walls, thick and unyielding, reflected every sound in a muted resonance, making even sharp tones seem gentle. Outside, artillery rumbled faintly, a distant drumbeat that set a slow rhythm beneath the low ceilings. Officers and aides moved quietly between rooms, conveying orders and observations, their steps soft on worn floors. Small objects, a cup of tea, a pen, a map, were handled with a tenderness that contrasted sharply with the intensity of decisions being made. Even amid tension, there was a sense of ceremony in movement, a calm awareness of the delicate balance between action and reflection. The underground corridors held these moments as if pausing time itself, and in that stillness, the heart of command beat quietly, aware of both control and fragility. Messages arrived intermittently, carried by couriers navigating streets that had become unpredictable. Each note was read carefully, internalized with quiet deliberation, decisions shaped by their weight. Reports of Soviet progress were soft but persistent, their inevitability gently acknowledged even in denial. Officers adjusted positions on maps, shifting colored pins, tracing lines that no longer held the promise of defense. Conversations flowed softly, sometimes ending in silence, as the limits of action became clearer. Even small disagreements were muted, voices lowered in recognition of the bunker's intimacy and gravity. The smell of damp concrete mixed with ink and paper, creating a sensory rhythm that accompanied every step and gesture. Each movement, each pause was measured, a careful balancing of thought and reaction. And as the day moved forward, the bunker held its own quiet universe, insulated yet attuned to the city above. Within these walls, history continued softly, each breath echoing the inevitability of what was to come. The atmosphere inside carried a strange contemplative weight. Officers leaned lightly on tables, hands tracing plans while eyes wandered toward the faint hum of the world above. The sound of distant engines, muted and steady, provided a subtle cadence, like a heartbeat beneath the concrete. Papers were sorted, pencils adjusted, maps studied with calm precision, each gesture a meditation on consequence. Conversations, though urgent in content, were delivered with soft intonation, like waves lapping against the edges of a quiet shore. Even gestures of frustration were tempered, restrained by the intimacy of proximity and the unspoken recognition of shared fate. A note folded and placed aside could carry more meaning than an argument, a small ritual of understanding and care. Outside the bunker, Berlin shifted and changed, yet below the surface a different rhythm held sway, deliberate and measured. And as officers continued their work, the stillness of the underground corridors offered a strange sense of calm amidst growing tension. Time inside moved slowly, yet inexorably, toward the moments that could no longer be postponed. Meals were shared quietly, small and functional, prepared with the simplest of resources. Cups of tea, bread, and preserves circulated with soft efficiency, each act a reminder of routine amidst upheaval. Conversation softened further, stories of the past quietly whispered, memories shared with gentle laughter or subdued sighs. Even in this small comfort, the sense of impermanence lingered, a quiet reminder that life above was changing with every passing hour. Paperwork was completed in calm concentration, notes folded neatly, pens lifted with care. The low hum of distant artillery remained a constant, a soft percussion beneath the movements of human life. Each small action, each careful step became part of the hypnotic rhythm of the bunker, marking the passage of days in subtle increments. Windows framed only concrete and sky, yet the light filtering down offered a soft, constant presence. And in these moments of measured calm, the residents of the bunker held on to continuity and ritual. Life below continued gently, tethered to the city above by sound, memory, and quiet anticipation. The air carried a faint tension, not loud or jarring, but persistent and inevitable. Steps in corridors, murmured conversations, and the occasional shift of furniture created a soft symphony of human activity. Every gesture was deliberate, every word measured, as if acknowledging the gravity of the space and time they occupied. The walls absorbed sounds, softening them, making every movement resonate gently through the underground chambers. Plans were drawn, adjusted, and reconsidered in a calm, methodical cadence that reflected both hope and quiet acceptance. Couriers came and went, their movements quick but muted, threads connecting the bunker to the city above. Even in the shadow of inevitability, there was a careful orchestration of thought and attention, a rhythm that slowed the world into reflection. Maps and messages were handled with precision, objects of both utility and comfort. And as the day waned, the bunker remained a quiet world, insulated yet aware, a heart beating softly beneath the streets. In the stillness of concrete corridors, the story of a city's last command whispered on. Night fell softly, bringing an even deeper calm to the underground refuge. Shadows stretched along the walls, their shapes gentle against muted light, folding into corners with quiet patience. Conversations dwindled to whispers, footsteps slowed, and the bunker's rhythm became a soft lullaby of endurance. Small acts of care persisted, notes exchanged, blankets adjusted, lamps tended, moments of humanity threading the confined space. The distant sounds of the city above, muted and rhythmic, created a subtle harmony with the measured movements below. Officers paused, reflecting in silence, tracing plans with fingertips, their attention softened by the enveloping stillness. Every gesture became part of the underground meditation, deliberate, unhurried, respectful of both space and time. Even fear, though present, was tempered by restraint and awareness, expressed gently rather than sharply. And in this quiet descent into the depths, the bunker held its own heartbeat, calm, steady, and attentive. Through the concrete corridors, the listener drifts onward, ready to follow the city as it bends toward its final hours. Far to the east, in rooms insulated from the city's chaos, the Soviet High Command gathered in deliberate calm. Zhukov, Konev, and their staff moved with practiced precision, tracing plans across maps that stretched long and wide over polished tables. The air was warm, carrying the faint scent of ink and paper, mingled with tobacco smoke curling softly from pipes. Stalin sat quietly, listening, observing, his presence heavy yet contained, shaping every decision with subtle influence. Strategies unfolded slowly, each adjustment measured, reflecting a tension beneath the surface of apparent control. The generals discussed troop movements, artillery positions, and timing, each word weighted with experience and cautious anticipation. Even rivalry was muted, restrained to careful negotiation rather than open contest, a quiet push and pull shaping the outcome. Reports arrived intermittently, carried by couriers across long distances, each one soft but insistent, a reminder of forces on the move. Through the rhythm of deliberation, the room carried a hypnotic sense of inevitability, a gentle tide moving toward the city's heart. And in this quiet calculation, the future of Berlin seemed to unfold, step by careful step. Maps were unfolded again and again, pins moved gently, lines redrawn with soft fingertips. Zhukov traced each corridor, each street, visualizing the city not as buildings, but as pathways of strategy and movement. Konev interjected calmly, suggesting subtle adjustments, his voice low but firm, blending rivalry with collaboration. Stalin's eyes lingered on each plan, absorbing detail quietly, deciding when to intervene with a single deliberate word. The room breathed slowly with the weight of its decisions, each pause and glance part of a measured rhythm. Reports of civilian movements, weather, and enemy positions were absorbed without haste, woven into the larger tapestry of strategy. Even disagreement was soft, expressed in careful tone, the room holding itself in calm balance. The generals leaned over maps and charts, tracing rivers, bridges, and avenues, as if feeling their texture beneath their fingertips. And in this slow orchestration, the pulse of command carried both authority and subtle tension. The plan for Berlin advanced, steady and deliberate, under quiet eyes. The generals exchanged subtle glances, each aware of the other's ambitions and influence. Decisions were layered with anticipation, measured both by practicality and by the unspoken race for credit. Stalin observed in silence, his gaze shifting from map to officer, from chart to window, as though seeing both strategy and its human weight. The air was thick with quiet energy, soft but insistent, as if even the walls carried their attention forward. Couriers moved lightly in and out of the room, delivering notes without disrupting the contemplative flow. Pencils tapped softly on paper, marking positions, adjusting timings, recording the rhythm of thought. Reports of distant advances arrived, read in hushed tones, their implications absorbed with careful deliberation. Even laughter, rare and subdued, carried the softness of brief relief amid concentration. And through all of this, the sense of inevitability threaded the conversation, a quiet current beneath the measured tension. The city of Berlin, far away, waited in hushed anticipation. Decisions were translated into orders, carried across vast distances by organized, precise channels. Each message traveled with soft insistence, a quiet demand for coordination and timing. Troops shifted according to these careful instructions, their movements synchronized across the expanse of territory. Maps in the hands of generals reflected patterns that were invisible to those beyond the room, an unseen order shaping the coming days. The air hummed with anticipation, the faint scratch of pencil on paper a constant accompaniment to discussion. Even the pauses in conversation carried meaning, the silence between words thick with consideration. Observations of weather, morale, and supply were noted delicately, each fact a thread in the fabric of the plan. Officers leaned close to one another, murmuring points, correcting details, refining rhythm, and as plans solidified, the quiet pressure beneath the calm shaped the future of streets, bridges, and neighborhoods far away. The slow tide of strategy continued, carrying its subtle weight across the land. Outside the command room, the world moved with soft, steady pulse. Couriers threaded through offices and hallways, the rhythm of their footsteps aligning with the quiet sense of purpose inside. Soldiers far from the city followed orders with gentle precision, their discipline shaping the landscape in subtle ways. Supply lines stretched carefully, wagons and trucks moving with the quiet insistence of a tide advancing. Each action, though small in isolation, was part of the larger measured cadence of the campaign. Even the distant rumble of artillery seemed muted, absorbed into the slow unfolding of strategy. The city of Berlin, unaware of the layers of calculation far to the east, awaited the invisible hands guiding its fate. And within the calm, measured planning of generals and leaders, the inevitability of movement flowed steadily forward. Each decision, softly implemented, threaded through miles of earth and sky. The world seemed to turn gently beneath their steady attention. The room held moments of reflection as well as calculation. Officers paused, tracing the paths of rivers and streets, imagining how each unit would respond to obstacles. Stalin listened quietly, his expression unreadable, allowing thoughts to settle before guiding attention subtly toward adjustments. Zhukov and Konev continued their dialogue in soft undertones, a rhythm of rivalry tempered by experience and respect. Each order given was considered carefully, weighed against both opportunity and risk. The air carried the faint scent of ink, paper, and tobacco, grounding the abstract plans in a tangible presence. Couriers returned, bearing news of enemy movement or weather changes, their information absorbed with quiet gravity. Even disagreement was held in restraint, discussion folded into observation, reflection, and patience. And in this gentle negotiation of power and strategy, the tide of history advanced imperceptibly yet relentlessly. The city's fate remained a quiet, unfolding certainty. Through long hours, the rhythm of command persisted, soft and continuous. Maps were revisited, pins adjusted, lines redrawn, reflecting the ever-shifting balance of terrain and time. Officers whispered over details, voices calm, each word measured, to avoid unnecessary alarm. Reports of distant victories or obstacles were absorbed with quiet attention, shaping the next movement without haste. Even in the midst of rivalry and tension, the room maintained a hypnotic cadence, deliberate and steady. Stalin's presence imposed a slow, gravitational pull, aligning attention and decisions with subtle force. The quiet energy of anticipation threaded through every gesture, every glance, every pause in discussion. And as night approached, the command room retained its stillness, a calm center amid the growing turbulence far to the west. The rhythm of preparation carried forward gently, connecting strategy with action in measured, thoughtful beats. Berlin awaited the arrival of the tide, unaware of the currents shaping its destiny. By the end of the day, the generals and their aides settled into quiet routine. Pencils rested, maps folded with care, and messages queued for the next hours of movement. The air remained thick with consideration, the gentle hum of anticipation a constant presence beneath their deliberate actions. Decisions made softly now would shape streets and neighborhoods in the coming days, each choice threading through human lives with quiet inevitability. Reports of troop positions, supply readiness, and weather forecasts were catalogued carefully, forming a slow, continuous rhythm of preparation. Even the smallest gestures, a cup of tea, a shared glance, a subtle adjustment of posture, carried significance within the calm cadence. Couriers moved with soft precision, carrying both instruction and reassurance across the network of command. And in the gentle stillness of the evening, the room rested briefly, a quiet pause in the ongoing flow of strategy. The measured tension remained, like a river beneath ice, moving slowly yet undeniably. Berlin's fate advanced softly toward its coming days, threaded through the careful hands of those guiding it. Through the quiet streets of Berlin, the Soviet advance moved steadily, measured by careful steps and soft coordination. Soldiers pressed forward, their eyes fixed on the silhouette of the Reichstag rising above the surrounding cityscape. Each block passed brought them closer to a structure that had long symbolized power, now quietly waiting to receive their presence. Rubble-lined streets required deliberate movement. Each meter gained a gentle negotiation with the terrain. The air carried a faint scent of smoke, dust, and earth, blending with the metallic tang of anticipation. Teams moved in synchronized rhythm, advancing with both purpose and patience, as though the city itself breathed in time with their progress. Civilians who remained watched from hidden corners, sensing the inevitability of what was to come without immediate disturbance. Even in the tension, there was a soft cadence to the movement, a hypnotic pulse beneath the urgent march. And in the distance, the Reichstag stood like a quiet promise, guiding each step forward. The city seemed to lean gently toward its coming moment. Soldiers paused at intersections, eyes scanning the outlines of buildings, noting passages and temporary cover. Each advance was deliberate, measured against the architecture that both hindered and protected. The Reichstag's dome glimmered faintly, a distant point of focus against the grey sky. Even in the hush of anticipation, the sounds of movement, boots, soft commands, the shifting of equipment formed a subtle rhythm. Courtyards and alleys became channels of steady passage, guiding troops with quiet certainty. The scent of damp stone mingled with the faint warmth of fires long extinguished, a sensory echo of the city's transformation. Officers communicated softly, gestures conveying intent without breaking the calm. Windows reflected pale light, offering glimpses of movement both above and below, while walls bore the muted marks of previous encounters. Each step brought soldiers closer, the block-by-block journey threading them into the city's slow pulse. And as they advanced, the Reichstag's presence became a quiet, guiding force, shaping both thought and motion. The approach required patience, a gentle negotiation with obstacles both expected and hidden. Streets were narrow, littered with debris, yet each path carried a rhythm of progress, subtle and persistent. Soldiers adjusted their steps, shifting with the cadence of the urban terrain, moving as much in reflection as in action. The distant dome served as a soft beacon, a visual marker drawing eyes and intentions toward its summit. Courtyards became temporary resting points, spaces to observe, breathe, and coordinate. Their stillness contrasted with the pressing momentum. The faint hum of distant engines and artillery formed a low, continuous undertone, synchronizing with the deliberate march. Even in movement, moments of quiet reflection emerged, soldiers noticing the angles of a wall, the scent of earth, the muted sounds of the city adapting around them. Small gestures, a hand on a brick, a soft adjustment of gear, carried significance in the slow rhythm of approach. And with each block traversed, the Reichstag drew closer, its symbolic weight both guiding and steadying the mind. The city seemed to fold gently around their advance, a silent witness to the inevitable. Officers marked positions, shifting emphasis softly as reconnaissance confirmed paths. Maps and mental notes guided the advance, every movement threaded into an unseen pattern of careful planning. Soldiers followed with quiet understanding, stepping lightly over rubble, pausing at thresholds, moving in synchrony. The smell of dust, faint smoke, and distant warmth lingered in corridors and courtyards, a sensory map of passage. Civilians, few and cautious, remained still, acknowledging both presence and inevitability without alarm. Each doorway and window became a quiet marker, a moment to adjust, anticipate, and continue. The rhythm of urban movement had become hypnotic, measured by meters gained and spaces navigated with attention. Even the smallest gestures, a shift of foot or glance along a street, carried weight in the soft pulse of advance. And as the Reichstag loomed larger, the sense of purpose threaded through every step, every breath, every soft command. The city moved gently with them, its heartbeat aligned with the soldiers' quiet momentum. The dome of the Reichstag drew closer, its stone and glass reflecting pale sunlight in muted brilliance. Soldiers advanced through avenues and alleys, each turn a careful negotiation with both memory and terrain. Courtyards offered fleeting moments of pause, spaces to breathe, to observe, to connect with the rhythm of their companions. The air was thick with anticipation, yet calm, carrying the sense of earth, stone, and distant fires. Officers whispered softly, directing movement, adjusting formations, and noting subtle changes in the urban landscape. Each step forward was measured, deliberate, almost meditative, as the city unfolded in blocks and corridors. Even in proximity to the symbolic target, discipline maintained a hypnotic cadence, guiding thought and movement together. Civilians who remained moved like shadows, their presence quietly acknowledged but unobtrusive. And in the soft persistence of each block traversed, the Reichstag became both goal and quiet anchor, pulling each step closer to destiny. The city held its breath, waiting in stillness for the final approach. Temporary pauses in streets allowed reflection, softened by the rhythm of measured movement. Soldiers leaned lightly on walls or peered along alleys, eyes tracing paths with calm attention. The distant dome remained in view, a silent promise that each step mattered, each decision carried forward. The faint scent of stone and earth mingled with lingering smoke, a sensory reminder of the city's slow transformation. Courtyards, alleys, and open spaces became markers of continuity, moments to synchronize, plan, and proceed with subtle purpose. Even minor adjustments of gear or position followed a quiet cadence, blending thought and action in smooth rhythm. Orders were given softly, each word deliberate, every gesture echoing restraint and attention. Civilians observed quietly, their stillness matching the careful pulse of advancing troops. And as blocks gave way to new streets, the Reichstag loomed ever larger, its silent gravity guiding both body and thought. The tide of progress moved gently, steadily, inexorably toward the heart of Berlin. The final blocks before the Reichstag were traversed with mindful patience, each street approached with reverence for both history and space. Soldiers advanced in synchronized rhythm, eyes scanning, hands adjusting, breaths measured to match the quiet cadence. Courtyards became soft points of reflection, moments to absorb the gravity of the target and the journey that brought them here. The scent of damp stone and faint smoke hung in the air, a gentle companion to every step. Officers adjusted formations with soft gestures, communicating intent without raising voices. Windows and doorways marked boundaries, each negotiated with careful observation and deliberate movement. Even in the final approach, the advance maintained its calm, hypnotic flow, threading soldiers into the city's pulse with precision. Civilians, though scarce, remained quiet, shadows in corners, their presence acknowledged without disturbance. And in the soft persistence of measured steps, the Reichstag's dome dominated the skyline, drawing every eye, every thought, every quiet breath. Berlin itself seemed to lean gently toward the inevitable, awaiting the final act. As the soldiers closed in, the Reichstag became a symbol not of destruction, but of arrival and culmination. Streets and alleys aligned, paths merging into a single rhythm that guided each step. The faint hum of distant engines and artillery was softened by distance, absorbed into the hypnotic cadence of advance. Courtyards and gardens offered brief points of stillness, moments to observe, breathe, and synchronize with companions. Officers gave quiet directives, subtle corrections that maintained the flow without disturbing the gentle momentum. The scent of dust, stone, and faint warmth permeated every step, a reminder of the city's living memory. Each block gained carried the weight of both anticipation and inevitability, threaded with soft awareness of history unfolding. Civilians, wherever they lingered, shared the rhythm quietly, unseen yet present in the city's pulse. And in these final steps, the Reichstag emerged fully, its silent gravity a guide for soldiers and listeners alike. Berlin waited softly, prepared for the moment when the flags would rise. Within Berlin, a quiet awareness settled over German commanders, a subtle acknowledgement that resistance was waning. Ammunition dwindled, supplies ran thin, and the once disciplined units moved with hesitant steps. Streets echoed less with marching, and more with the soft shuffle of tired feet and whispered orders. Even officers, trained for precision, allowed moments of pause, their eyes reflecting both fatigue and resignation. Civilians, aware of the shifting tide, searched quietly for water, bread, and whatever small comforts could sustain them. The air was thick with dust and warmth, carrying faint scents of smoke, stone, and the lingering remnants of hurried meals. The city's heartbeat slowed as silence stretched between the distant bursts and muted commands. Courtyards and alleys became spaces of reflection rather than action, each one holding the memory of past movement. And as the day wore on, the rhythm of collapse threaded through every corridor, street, and apartment. Berlin itself seemed to exhale, heavy with expectation and restraint. Officers conferred in low tones, tracing lines on maps that no longer promised control. Each decision became measured not by strategy, but by the delicate management of scarcity and human endurance. Soldiers moved quietly, conserving energy and supplies, aware of the futility of force without means. Even the air felt heavy, soft, yet insistent, pressing gently against the walls of buildings and the chests of those within. Civilians navigated familiar streets with cautious attention, their small gestures, lifting a bucket, closing a door, carrying significance beyond immediate necessity. Windows reflected muted light, offering brief glimpses of movement, shadows that were part of the city's slow rhythm. The scent of earth and dust lingered, accompanied by faint warmth from walls and fires long diminished. Silence became a companion, heavier than distant rumble, softening the passage of time, yet reminding all of what was unavoidable. And through the quiet, Berlin itself seemed to bend gently under the weight of anticipation. The city's pulse slowed, measured in careful steps and quiet breath. In the underground corridors, officers felt the subtle shift of morale, the tension giving way to subdued reflection. Messages traveled slowly, arriving with updates of scattered units, exhausted men, and diminishing hope. Decisions were now minimal, each one a careful negotiation with circumstance rather than choice. Soldiers adjusted gear lightly, resting when possible, their movements deliberate to conserve strength. Civilians lingered in corners and basements, drawing water, preparing meals, and whispering softly to one another. The faint scent of paper, stone, and dust wove through hallways, grounding human effort in a tangible present. Conversations were hushed, words measured, each statement both careful and significant. The city's rhythm seemed to slow further, corridors and rooms reflecting the collective weariness. And as silence grew heavier than noise, the human heart and the city's pulse merged in quiet synchrony. The movement of life continued softly, threading through fatigue and resignation alike. Along the streets, small groups of soldiers gathered to assess remaining strength and ration supplies. Each glance, each word, carried careful intention, a negotiation between duty and survival. The city's architecture, once a canvas for strategy, now formed gentle boundaries guiding movement and thought. Civilians stepped lightly, attentive to the soft rhythm of those around them, avoiding obstruction while preserving their own continuity. Dust and faint smoke mingled in the air, offering sensory markers of time and space. Courtyards became still, echoes of past passage lingering like quiet memory. The hum of distant engines and occasional artillery were absorbed softly into the fabric of silence. Even minor gestures, a shift of a backpack, adjustment of clothing, the careful closing of a door, were imbued with significance. And in this quiet negotiation between scarcity and endurance, the city moved with measured, gentle inevitability. Each step threaded humanity into the slowly waning rhythm of Berlin. Families and neighbors shared whispered words, small acts of generosity, and muted rituals of care. The quiet search for food and water became an unspoken choreography, a rhythm threading rooms and basements together. Children, bewildered yet observant, learned to move with caution, sensing the gentle weight of change without knowing its depth. Meals were prepared with care, bread divided into fragments, water carried in quiet attention. The faint scent of warmth, earth and stone lingered in kitchens and hallways alike, marking the slow passage of time. Even in scarcity, small routines persisted, folding blankets, washing dishes, arranging clothing, rituals that reminded the city of continuity. Conversations flowed softly, stories whispered, memories shared, a gentle current threading human life together. Outside, distant sounds of the city's unrest moved softly through alleys and streets, absorbed by walls and courtyards. And as day shifted toward evening, the quiet weight of collapse settled deeper into every home, every corridor, every heart. Berlin's pulse continued, slowed but unbroken, carrying all toward the next gentle moment. Command centers became quiet chambers of observation and reflection, rather than action. Officers consulted maps with soft gestures, noting the positions of units more in memory than expectation. The rhythm of instruction had slowed, orders minimal, each intended to preserve life, rather than influence the battle. Soldiers rested where possible, their bodies and minds attuned to the stillness, moving only when necessary. Civilians navigated familiar spaces with soft care, aware of scarcity but attentive to each other. Windows reflected muted light, giving a sense of time passing while marking spaces of calm and observation. Even the faint sound of distant artillery seemed absorbed into the slow cadence of existence. And through it all, the city's quiet pulse threaded together human presence, endurance, and anticipation. The weight of stillness carried gently over streets and corridors alike. Berlin moved softly, bending beneath the inevitability of change. In quieter corners, letters and notes were exchanged, small gestures of connection that carried profound meaning. Families reassured one another, sharing knowledge of food, water, and shelter, threading human care into the city's subtle rhythm. Soldiers paused to listen, observe, and adjust, their movements deliberate and calm. Dust and stone, faint smoke, and distant warmth filled the senses, grounding activity in tangible presence. The streets seemed to shrink into corridors of careful passage, pathways marked by thought and attention rather than urgency. Even simple acts, lifting a bucket, arranging a blanket, closing a shutter, became part of the hypnotic rhythm of survival. Conversations were soft, stories and memories, threading quietly through the confines of apartments and cellars, and in these measured gestures, the weight of life and endurance became a gentle pulse beneath the city's surface. Berlin continued its slow, soft breathing, carrying both despair and resilience within its rhythm, each movement threaded toward the inevitability of tomorrow. As evening settled, the city seemed to fold gently under the weight of quiet reflection. Footsteps were lighter, conversations hushed, the rhythm of activity slowed to conserve energy. Soldiers and civilians alike adapted to scarcity with soft deliberation, each action carefully measured. Corridors and streets became spaces of gentle negotiation, where presence and movement were balanced with patience. The faint scent of dust, earth, and distant smoke mingled with warmth from buildings, forming a sensory reminder of endurance. Officers consulted maps in low tones, adjusting memory and observation to the shifting reality. Children, sensing the calm, moved softly, their attention captured by small acts of care and continuity. And as night deepened, the silence grew heavier than noise, a gentle companion to those navigating the slow cadence of survival. The city exhaled softly, threading humanity through the dim spaces of collapse. Berlin waited quietly, carrying the weight of inevitable change forward. Within the quiet confines of the Führer bunker, the world above seemed distant, muffled by layers of concrete and earth. It was April, and the day held the muted weight of significance. Hitler's last birthday approached with an uneasy stillness. Officers and aides moved softly, carrying out routines that now seemed almost ceremonial, gestures of care in a space, shrinking with inevitability. The air was thick with the warmth of many bodies in close quarters, the faint scent of paper, ink, and tobacco lingering among the low ceilings. Conversations were subdued, words measured, each statement carrying the gravity of dwindling options and mounting despair. Eva Braun moved quietly among the corridors, her presence a soft counterpoint to tension, moments of normalcy threaded through the underground rhythm. Plans and reports were exchanged in hushed tones, strategies absorbed more in reflection than expectation, their meaning fading under the pressure of time. The bunker, heavy and still, held the collective heartbeat of those confined, a slow pulse that carried both fear and quiet resignation. Even the faint sounds from above, the distant rumble of artillery and muted city movements, seemed softened, absorbed into the calm interior, and through it all, a sense of inevitability threaded every gesture and glance, binding the residents to the moments yet to come. Small celebrations were marked quietly. A cake laid with soft attention, candles flickering with gentle warmth. Hitler accepted greetings with subdued acknowledgement, the ceremony more a reflection than a festivity, carrying the weight of time rather than joy. Words were careful, smiles measured, the echo of past grandeur almost imperceptible beneath the pressing reality. The air carried a faint scent of sugar and wax, mingled with the warmth of the gathered aides, their faces reflecting fatigue and contemplation. Conversations drifted gently toward memories, small reminiscences shared in whispers that floated softly through corridors. Even moments of laughter, brief and restrained, were absorbed by the concrete walls, grounding the human presence within a world closing in. Eva Braun moved quietly, her gestures deliberate, softening tension with subtle attention and companionship. Messages and reports continued to arrive, read with measured care, their urgency tempered by an awareness of futility. And in this gentle, surreal rhythm, the day moved forward, each second carrying both human warmth and the shadow of inevitability. The underground world exhaled softly, a calm breath beneath the surface of a collapsing Reich. Decisions once grand and commanding were now small, quiet, and reflective, handled with gentle deliberation. Officers whispered, voices low and calm, reconciling duty with awareness of the impending end. The movements of staff became deliberate, almost ritualistic, each step and gesture holding significance in the dwindling scope of control. The faint scent of ink and paper mingled with warmth, and the muted metallic tang of the underground corridors. Maps lay unfolded, not as tools for conquest, but as markers of what had been, each line a memory of strategy and loss. Even disagreements were muted, exchanged with careful words and soft tones, acknowledging reality more than ambition. The rhythm of the bunker had shifted from command to reflection, a measured cadence threading lives through stone and air. Every gesture carried both attention and quiet care, whether arranging papers, adjusting seating, or offering a gentle word. And as shadows lengthened in low-lit corners, the awareness of time's passage deepened, binding each occupant to the slow flow of approaching finality. The heartbeat of the underground world remained calm, measured, yet charged with unspoken culmination. On April 29th, the bunker became a space of stillness, punctuated by soft rituals and muted observation. Hitler married Eva Braun, a brief acknowledgement of personal continuity amid the collapse, their vows quiet and intimate. The air was heavy with the faint scent of flowers, ink, and warmth, small tokens of humanity threading the concrete corridors. Officers observed in respectful silence, gestures subdued, eyes reflecting both empathy and quiet acceptance. Conversations, though minimal, were weighted with recognition of inevitability, words flowing slowly and deliberately. Staff moved with care, delivering messages, adjusting schedules, and performing small acts of attention that anchored the day. The rhythm of movement remained hypnotic, each step and pause a meditation on human presence and the fleeting nature of circumstance. Even the distant sounds of artillery above were softened, absorbed into the gentle cadence of life beneath the city. And as the day progressed, the awareness of conclusion threaded through every gesture, every breath, every whispered word. The bunker held its quiet universe, poised on the brink of irreversible change. Evening brought a deeper hush, the underground corridors heavy with reflection and subdued anticipation. Decisions were minimal, gestures deliberate, each moment carrying more significance than the last. Officers and aides moved softly, sharing information, small comforts and subtle reassurances as the air thickened with the weight of finality. The faint scent of ink, paper, and the warmth of shared presence lingered, grounding activity in sensory reality. Conversations became reflective, stories whispered, memories exchanged, threading calm through the underlying tension. Eva Braun moved lightly among the corridors, her quiet presence a gentle counterpoint to despair. Maps and reports were absorbed with calm deliberation, each annotation and note a meditation on inevitability. Even the occasional laughter or sigh carried the softness of human endurance, grounding the moment in delicate rhythm. And as night deepened, the bunker seemed to hold its breath, each occupant bound to the slow pulse of time and the imminence of change. The underground world remained calm, hypnotic, and intimately aware. Preparations for the final act were handled with quiet precision. each detail attended to in measured steps. Rooms were arranged, papers organized, and equipment placed with gentle care, a rhythm of intention threading the space. Officers moved softly, offering guidance, observing and adjusting, their gestures deliberate and restrained. The air was warm, carrying the faint sense of human presence, ink, paper, and subdued incense of small rituals. Conversations were hushed, reflective, careful, each word a quiet acknowledgement of the inevitable. Even movements of clothing, chairs, or minor supplies became gestures of mindfulness, a rhythm of calm order. The distant hum of the city above, muted and persistent, became a soft background to the concentrated stillness below. And in the quiet of these final preparations, the human presence threaded through stone and shadow, anchored in gentle awareness. Every breath, glance, and gesture carried significance, measured against the impending stillness of history. The day bent softly toward its inevitable close, steady and deliberate. Nightfall brought the final hushed moments of anticipation. The bunker held itself in stillness, officers and aides seated or pacing lightly, each aware of the finite passage of time. Eva Braun moved quietly, her presence threading softness and warmth through the low-lit corridors. The faint scent of earth, stone, and paper mixed with subtle warmth, a sensory map of quiet human endurance. Conversations ceased for reflection, whispers softened into silence, and the rhythm of life slowed into deliberate pauses. Even minor gestures, adjusting papers, leaning lightly on a railing, shifting weight, were suffused with calm awareness. The distant city above was muted, absorbed by layers of concrete and intention, leaving only the gentle heartbeat of the underground world. And in this hush, the inevitability of finality threaded through every presence, soft yet resolute, binding the last hours together. The bunker exhaled slowly, its pulse synchronized with the quiet steps of history. In the final moments, actions were deliberate, measured, intimate, yet charged with quiet magnitude. Hitler and Eva Braun retreated to the private quarters, the air carrying the faint scent of flowers and paper, a delicate companion to the weight of finality. Staff moved softly, attending to their duties with gentle care, maintaining continuity and calm. Officers watched, silent and respectful, acknowledging both personal choice and historical significance, without disturbance. Each gesture, from placing a note to adjusting a blanket, became a thread in the hypnotic rhythm of presence. The corridors and rooms seemed to absorb both the stillness and the intensity, holding time softly in its embrace. Even the distant hum of engines, artillery, and wind above was softened, integrated into the slow pulse of human awareness. And as the moments passed quietly, the leadership of the Reich fell into history. Its absence felt more as stillness than noise. The underground world exhaled gently, carrying forward the city's slow, calm pulse. With dawn approaching, the bunker settled into a profound, reflective quiet. Officers and aides moved lightly, their steps almost meditative, performing small acts of care and continuity. The faint scent of paper, warmth, and stone lingered, grounding awareness in sensory reality. Conversations were soft, reflective, and minimal threads of calm, connecting the residents to one another and to time itself. Maps and notes remained carefully placed, symbols of the past, absorbed by the gentle rhythm of the space. Even distant sounds from the city above were hushed, absorbed into the calm of stone and human presence. The absence of leadership was felt not as chaos, but as a profound silent shift, threading the underground pulse with reflection and stillness. And in this soft, deliberate rhythm, the bunker became both witness and participant, holding its quiet universe, as the Reich approached its final chapter. Berlin exhaled gently, carrying the weight of history softly forward, threading anticipation into the calm of a world about to change. In the quiet streets of Berlin, small groups moved cautiously, each step measured against both the city's contours and the weight of uncertainty. Soldiers, officers, and civilians alike sought passage beyond walls and rubble, threading pathways through alleys that had become both maze and memory. The air carried the faint sense of dust, smoke, and faint warmth, blending with the tension of movement and the quiet anticipation of escape. Each footfall was deliberate, each whisper carefully pitched, as though the city itself listened to every sound. Families huddled together, hands intertwined, pausing at each corner to observe, to plan, to breathe. Soldiers of the SS and remnants of the Wehrmacht moved with equal care, their uniforms brushing softly against debris, each step a negotiation between caution and necessity. Even in their urgency, the rhythm was hypnotic, a slow, deliberate pulse-threading movement through Berlin's maze. Windows and doors offered fleeting glimpses of others attempting the same, shadows passing silently through the quiet corridors of the city. And as the groups advanced, Berlin seemed to contract gently around them, a space both familiar and subtly threatening. Each pathway carried the soft weight of hope and risk alike, guiding the steps forward. Some groups moved in careful silence, shadows beneath low walls and broken arches. They paused at intersections, listening, adjusting their path, calculating the slow dance of escape. The faint hum of distant engines and artillery above was absorbed into the rhythm of deliberate movement. Children and elderly walked quietly, often supported by younger companions, their steps aligned with the hypnotic cadence of survival. Officers whispered instructions, gestures soft and precise, threading knowledge into the unfolding passage. The scent of earth and stone lingered with every step, grounding presence in sensory reality. Courtyards and gardens offered brief reprieve, a moment to assess direction and distance without disrupting the slow rhythm. Even the occasional sound of movement elsewhere, the shuffle of another group, the faint scrape of debris was absorbed, acknowledged, and incorporated into careful strategy. And as the night deepened, the city's maze of streets and alleys became both challenge and guide, shaping each movement with gentle insistence. Berlin breathed quietly around those attempting to vanish into its folds. Some vanished entirely, slipping past the boundaries of attention with soft coordination and a measured pace. Others were discovered, their presence acknowledged with quiet command or restrained intervention, a reminder that the city was both sanctuary and trap. Soldiers and civilians alike adapted to the rhythm of the environment, using shadows, silence, and the careful timing of steps to thread through the urban landscape. Each corridor and alley became a channel of subtle negotiation, movement guided by perception and anticipation. The faint scent of smoke, stone, and distant warmth accompanied the passage, a sensory map of survival woven into the body's awareness. Even the small gestures, adjusting clothing, leaning lightly against a wall, exchanging a soft word, carried significance, maintaining both calm and focus. Reports and updates traveled quietly among groups, careful exchanges that guided steps without urgency, and in the gentle unfolding of the city's maze, each attempt threaded the line between hope and inevitability, between success and quiet capture. The city's pulse, slow yet persistent, seemed to bend around each careful advance. Every movement carried both risk and quiet resolve. Within hidden courtyards and shadowed hallways, soldiers paused to regroup, the soft exchange of words reinforcing order amidst chaos. Civilians whispered quietly, coordinating water, food, and small comforts along the subtle paths. The air, heavy with dust and faint warmth, pressed gently against walls, enveloping all in sensory presence. Each decision, whether to pause or advance, was measured, deliberate, threading thought and motion in careful harmony. The rhythm of movement became hypnotic, a blend of caution, endurance, and anticipation. Even minor gestures, handing a bottle of water, adjusting a child's cloak, leaning against a stone wall, carried meaning within the quiet orchestration of escape. Windows, doors, and narrow passageways marked points of reflection, moments to observe, adjust, and proceed softly. And as the night deepened, Berlin itself seemed to fold gently around those who moved, guiding, testing, and absorbing every careful step. The city's pulse matched their rhythm, slow yet insistent, threading quiet tension through the unfolding journey. Each turn and alley became both obstacle and guide, shaping the silent narrative of survival. Some groups found temporary reprieve, small apartments, or basements offering moments of stillness and breath. The faint scent of paper, stone, and lingering warmth filled these quiet refuges, grounding presence in tangible reality. Soldiers whispered guidance, families murmured encouragement, and all shared the hypnotic rhythm of pause and preparation. Even in safety, awareness remained, eyes scanning exits and listening for the faintest sounds of movement beyond walls. Minor gestures, a sip of water, adjusting a blanket, a careful note left for others, threaded continuity through the fleeting calm. The gentle cadence of silence and preparation carried both hope and apprehension, a measured heartbeat beneath the shadowed city. Each temporary haven offered reflection, a moment to recalibrate both body and thought for the journey ahead. And as groups prepared to move once more, Berlin's alleys and corridors seemed to fold softly, drawing them forward with subtle insistence. The night carried them onward, threading tension and calm into every step. Survival depended on patience, perception, and quiet resolve. Some individuals were caught, their presence acknowledged by those nearby, a brief, calm intervention that ended the passage. Others vanished into shadows, their existence reduced to memory and the faint trace of movement. The city itself became a character, guiding and challenging, absorbing each attempt into its layered streets and alleys. The scent of stone, earth, and faint smoke lingered, a quiet reminder of endurance and risk. Small gestures, adjusting gear, leaning lightly against walls, exchanging soft words, threaded continuity and focus into the movement. Courtyards, broken gardens, and narrow streets became points of reflection, guiding steps while shaping the rhythm of passage. Even in uncertainty, the pulse of human determination threaded through corridors, alleys, and hidden paths, forming a slow, hypnotic cadence. And as dawn approached, the soft light of morning touched walls and rubble, illuminating subtle choices and careful movements. The city exhaled gently, observing both those who vanished and those who remained caught. Each attempt, whether ending in freedom or capture, became part of Berlin's quiet, patient rhythm. By early morning, the city held both calm and tension, a quiet observer to the dwindling attempts at escape. Soldiers and civilians moved with increasing care, guided by perception, memory, and the gentle insistence of the urban maze. The faint warmth of sunlight threaded through gaps in rubble and walls, illuminating narrow paths and shaded corridors. Courtyards became quiet points of reflection, temporary havens for breath and observation. The scent of stone, dust, and faint smoke lingered with each step, threading sensory presence into every movement. Minor gestures, a shift of weight, adjustment of clothing, or careful placement of a hand, carried profound significance within the hypnotic rhythm of passage. Groups adjusted and adapted, merging strategy with endurance, threading calm into the tension of survival. And as daylight spread softly, Berlin seemed to fold around the careful, quiet movements, absorbing every choice into its slow, insistent pulse. The city watched silently as hope, fear, and determination intertwined in measured cadence. Each step carried both life and the echo of inevitability, guiding the day gently forward. Even as escape waned, small threads of resistance persisted, soft yet persistent. Individuals navigated corridors, alleys, and shadowed passageways with deliberate calm, their rhythm synchronized with awareness and patience. Civilians and soldiers alike maintained a hypnotic cadence, observing, pausing, and adjusting to the gentle insistence of the city's paths. The air, heavy with dust, warmth, and faint smoke, threaded every movement with sensory grounding. Courtyards, broken gardens, and narrow streets became markers of both progress and reflection, points where decision and pause intertwined. Gentle gestures, handing water, whispering advice, a reassuring touch, wove human continuity into the slow rhythm of movement. And as the sun rose higher, illuminating rubble, walls, and streets, Berlin absorbed the quiet persistence of those threading escape. The city exhaled softly, a calm yet insistent witness to attempts, losses, and vanishing presences alike. Each step carried weight, threading both hope and quiet inevitability forward into the unfolding day. The Reichstag rose quietly against the muted sky, its stone walls holding the memory of decades and the weight of recent chaos. Soviet soldiers approached in careful, measured steps, each movement guided by both strategy and a gentle awareness of history unfolding. The streets leading to the building carried the faint scent of dust, smoke, and warmth, threading sensory presence into the rhythm of their advance. Courtyards and stairways became spaces of deliberate passage, each step synchronized with the calm pulse of purpose. Officers whispered softly, gestures restrained, conveying direction without urgency. Even in tension, the human heartbeat maintained a measured cadence, threading anticipation into muscle and thought. The building loomed, both obstacle and symbol, its silent presence shaping each careful approach. Windows, once frames of routine life, now reflected the shifting light of a world in transition. And as footsteps echoed lightly along stone corridors, the weight of history seemed to fold gently into the moment. Each movement carried the soft intensity of inevitability, leading toward a quiet yet profound culmination. Inside the building, the halls stretched into muted corridors of memory and presence, each step soft yet resonant. Soldiers moved through rooms and stairwells with gentle care, attentive to walls, debris, and the soft rhythm of advancing comrades. The faint scent of stone, soot, and lingering warmth marked each passage, grounding awareness in tangible reality. Even small gestures, adjusting a pack, leaning lightly against a wall, exchanging a brief whisper, carried significance, threading calm through the pulse of action. Courtyards and lobbies became spaces for reflection as much as movement, the quiet cadence of steps tracing history's unfolding. Officers communicated in low, soft tones, passing instructions and encouragement with deliberate attention. And through the quiet motion, anticipation threaded every corridor, every stairwell, every careful step toward the upper floors. Windows caught the shifting light, illuminating dust motes and faint smoke, integrating history and presence into a hypnotic rhythm. The building exhaled gently under the movement of human persistence. Each step drew the soldiers closer to both culmination and quiet reflection. The final ascent carried a sense of weight and inevitability, the pulse of footsteps synchronized with purpose. Hallways narrowed, stairwells rose, and the stone walls absorbed each measured movement. Soldiers paused occasionally, exchanging subtle signals and soft words, ensuring continuity and safety in delicate rhythm. The scent of warmth, dust, and faint smoke lingered, integrating sensory grounding into every breath and step. Even minor gestures, adjusting equipment, a whispered acknowledgement, a careful glance, wove calm into the rhythm of progression. Courtyards and small chambers offered brief moments of reflection, spaces to observe and plan before continuing upward. And as the top floors drew nearer, anticipation threaded through muscle and mind alike, binding awareness to purpose. Light shifted softly through broken windows, illuminating movement with gentle clarity, marking distance traveled and time passed. The pulse of history seemed to slow and stretch in these corridors, embracing both action and quiet thought. Each step carried not only presence but reflection, threading calm through the climax of the day. In the final halls, soldiers gathered their strength, movements deliberate, attention fixed on both purpose and passage. The faint sound of distant city movement drifted softly, integrated into the hypnotic cadence of effort and anticipation. Officers whispered guidance, their tones low and measured, threading cohesion through the small groups ascending slowly. Dust and warmth clung lightly to skin and clothing, grounding each individual in the tangible environment of stone, air, and human presence. Courtyards glimpsed through shattered windows offered brief perspectives of the world outside, threading reflection into each careful step. Even minor actions, adjusting a pack strap, exchanging a soft word, pausing to breathe, carried significance, shaping the rhythm of collective progress. And as the uppermost floors neared, the sense of culmination deepened, soft yet resolute, threading focus and awareness into each gesture. The stone and smoke seemed to bend gently around the movement, integrating history into the present. Each corridor, stairwell, and room became part of the slow unfolding of the moment. The building, witness to centuries, exhaled quietly beneath the steady rhythm of human presence. At last the soldiers emerged to the upper platforms, the sky above muted but attentive, as if holding its breath. The Reichstag's roof became a stage for calm assertion, the red flag prepared for gentle elevation, hands lifted carefully, coordinating movement with precision and deliberation, threading soft focus into each gesture. The faint warmth of sunlight mingled with dust and air, marking presence and time with subtle clarity. Officers nodded, whispers passed, and gestures synchronized, binding effort to purpose with quiet attention. Even the softest footsteps seemed amplified, resonating through stone and memory alike, each echo a reflection of presence. And as the flag rose, its red hue carried more than color, it threaded meaning, endurance, and the quiet culmination of relentless passage. The city below remained hushed, absorbed into the rhythm of completion and observation. Each movement, each gesture, held both calm and significance, the weight of history folded gently into the present. The flag swayed softly, a quiet pulse atop Berlin's vast and enduring stone. The surrounding rooms and halls held soldiers in poised stillness, observing the culmination with measured awareness. Dust motes drifted in muted sunlight, scent of stone and warmth lingering, forming a quiet sensory map of presence. Gentle conversations threaded between officers and comrades, whispers of achievement, reflection, and careful observation. Courtyards and corridors below seemed suspended, waiting in soft rhythm as the culmination unfolded. Even minor gestures, a hand adjusting a strap, a subtle nod, a gentle glance threaded human attention into the hypnotic cadence. The building absorbed each movement, each soft echo, threading history and human presence into a slow, deliberate pulse. And through it all, the rhythm of anticipation and reflection merged, creating a quiet bridge between past and present. The red flag, elevated gently, became both symbol and testament, swaying softly above stone and memory. Each observer carried awareness in quiet unity, synchronized with the gentle heartbeat of the moment. The Reichstag itself exhaled softly, holding presence, history, and calm in a single measured breath. Smoke from nearby fires mingled faintly with air currents, scenting the upper halls with warmth and memory. Soldiers paused intermittently, allowing soft observation and subtle recalibration, threading presence into every movement. Courtyards and windows below reflected muted light, carrying both shadow and clarity into the upper spaces. Even small gestures, shifting weight, a whispered instruction, adjustment of gear, maintained the rhythm of calm attentiveness. The pulse of anticipation had softened into reflection, a hypnotic current threading human and stone together. And as the red flag continued its gentle sway, each observer sensed the quiet gravity of culmination, the slow exhalation of history into presence. The faint warmth of air, the lingering scent of dust, and the muted hum of distant city movement grounded each breath in reality. Even the softest conversation echoed subtly, blending into the hypnotic cadence of accomplishment. Each hand, glance, and breath carried awareness of the city, the passage, and the enduring moment. Berlin exhaled slowly beneath the rhythm of human attention, threading calm into the apex of history. As the day drew toward gentle close, soldiers and officers moved softly, observing, reflecting, and maintaining quiet presence. Dust, warmth, and the faint scent of stone threaded through corridors, stairwells, and halls, grounding awareness in tangible reality. Gentle gestures, adjusting clothing, passing a note, a soft nod, carried profound meaning within the measured pace of completion. Courtyards and rooms offered subtle reflection, spaces to absorb both accomplishment and the weight of passing history. Even distant city sounds were muted, absorbed into the building's slow exhalation, threading calm through the surrounding air. The red flag swayed lightly, a gentle pulse atop stone, threading meaning, endurance, and quiet culmination. Each observer's heartbeat synchronized with the building's measured rhythm, creating a soft harmony of attention, reflection, and presence. And as evening light shifted, shadows deepened with gentle clarity, carrying history and calm in equal measure. The city beneath seemed to pause, observing the quiet pulse of presence above. Every gesture, step, and breath contributed to a hypnotic rhythm, threading culmination into the ongoing life of Berlin. The streets of Berlin stretched quietly under the weight of late afternoon light, debris and dust settling softly across cobblestones. Soldiers moved with slow deliberation, hands unclasping from rifles, gestures gentle yet irrevocable, as surrender unfolded in measured rhythm. Officers gathered quietly, signatures exchanged on papers that carried the weight of history and the finality of compliance. The air held a faint warmth, mingled with dust, faint smoke, and lingering echoes of past action, grounding every movement in sensory awareness. Even small gestures, adjusting a coat, leaning lightly on rubble, a soft glance exchanged, threaded human presence into the stillness. Courtyards and intersections, once points of conflict, now held calm pauses, the rhythm of passage shifting from command to quiet reflection. Civilians watched softly, peeking from cellars and doorways, the tension of months giving way to hushed observation. And through every quiet step, every careful word, the city seemed to exhale, folding surrender gently into stone and memory. Soldiers and officers moved in hypnotic cadence, synchronized with the soft pulse of inevitability. The streets held both history and calm, guiding presence into the quiet aftermath. Generals Keitel and Jodl moved with deliberate care, signatures laid gently upon documents that ended the prolonged tension of command. Each stroke of the pen, each subtle pause, carried the weight of resignation and responsibility, threading calm through the room and beyond. Their aides whispered quietly, passing messages and observing with subdued attention, the rhythm hypnotic yet deliberate. The faint scent of ink, paper, and warmth lingered in the air, grounding every breath and gesture in tangible presence. Even minor movements, a shift of weight, a hand resting briefly on a desk, carried significance within the measured cadence of surrender. Courtyards and hallways outside seemed to absorb the quiet, the stone and rubble, embracing the soft exhalation of compliance. Soldiers nearby lowered arms and paused, breathing deep, their rhythm slowing into reflection and observation. And as the signatures completed, the building itself seemed to fold gently around the moment, marking history with quiet acceptance. Each action threaded both consequence and calm into the soft pulse of the city. The surrender, though official, was also a quiet meditation on inevitability. Through Berlin's streets, the surrender rippled outward, soldiers pausing mid-step, adjusting clothing and packs, grounding awareness in the sensory rhythm of their surroundings. Courtyards and alleys absorbed movement, offering subtle spaces for reflection and measured motion. The faint scent of stone, dust, and warmth lingered, each inhalation tethering presence to place. Even gestures as small as lowering helmets or resting hands on walls carried the weight of quiet acknowledgement. Civilians observed with tentative attention, stepping lightly from hidden corners to witness the unfolding calm. Officers guided movements gently, coordinating small groups, ensuring order without haste, threading hypnotic cadence into each step. And as rifles touched the ground, the sound muted yet definitive, Berlin exhaled softly, holding its breath in measured acknowledgement. The rhythm of surrender was slow, deliberate, and serene, each moment carrying both presence and reflection. Dust motes floated through sunlight, settling upon stone and brick, as if marking time and memory. Every step, every pause, every lowered weapon contributed to the gentle unfolding of history's quiet turn. In quieter quarters, groups of soldiers paused, seated lightly on debris or leaning against walls, their movements slow, deliberate, reflective. The faint warmth of sunlight carried through broken windows, mingling with dust, stone, and the lingering faint scent of smoke. Officers exchanged soft words, nods, and gestures, threading coordination and reassurance into the hypnotic rhythm. Each breath was measured, each glance gentle, as the city absorbed the slow transformation from resistance to acceptance. Even minor motions, adjusting packs, shifting weight, exchanging small items, carried significance within the calm cadence of surrender. Courtyards and empty streets became observatories of reflection, offering gentle space to witness the unfolding stillness. And as the afternoon deepened, the soft exhalation of the city seemed synchronized with human awareness, folding quiet presence into history. Soldiers and civilians alike found rhythm in restraint and observation, tethered to the muted pulse of existence. Dust and warmth became companions to every gesture, grounding awareness in tangible sensation. The surrender unfolded with measured calm, threading inevitability through the soft breath of Berlin. Small pockets of movement carried the same quiet, hypnotic cadence, each soldier navigating rubble with care, each step deliberate and reflective. The faint scent of stone and dust mingled with warmth, threading sensory presence into every gesture. Civilians moved softly, retrieving small belongings, observing quietly, threading their own rhythm into the unfolding calm. Even gestures as simple as a nod, a shifted weight, or a brief glance reinforced the delicate cadence of surrender. Officers coordinated gently, guiding movements, ensuring both order and reflective presence, threading calm into each passage. Courtyards, stairways, and intersections absorbed these motions, holding them in quiet meditation as the city exhaled around them, and as shadows lengthened, the soft touch of sunlight illuminated dust and stone, creating a gentle, hypnotic rhythm of presence. Weapons lowered, hands unclasped, and soldiers breathed quietly, threading human awareness into the pulse of the city. The streets, once instruments of defiance, became quiet corridors of observation, reflection, and subtle continuity. Every movement, breath, and gesture carried the soft weight of history, folded gently into calm. Evening deepened with gentle measured light, casting warmth and shadow across the broken streets. Soldiers paused mid-step, leaning against walls or rubble, resting in the hypnotic cadence of reflection and awareness. Civilians observed from thresholds and cellars, quiet witnesses to the slow unraveling of conflict, threading patience into the city's pulse. The faint warmth of air mingled with dust and stone, grounding presence in tangible hypnotic sensation. Officers moved softly, whispering instructions and reassurance, threading coordination through the calm rhythm. Even the smallest gestures, a hand extended to assist, a shifted pack, a gentle glance, reinforced both awareness and reflective continuity. Courtyards and intersections held stillness, absorbing presence into the quiet exhalation of surrender. And as night approached, the soft layering of shadow and warm light created a gentle cadence, threading calm through every step, every breath. Soldiers, officers, and civilians alike synchronized with the hypnotic rhythm of quiet acceptance. Berlin itself seemed to pause, exhaling slowly beneath the soft pulse of presence. In the final hours of surrender, movement softened, gestures slowed, and breaths deepened in measured awareness. Dust and warmth clung lightly to every surface, threading presence into tactile memory. Officers coordinated softly, ensuring small groups maintained calm rhythm, each step deliberate, each gesture meaningful. Even minor adjustments, clothing, packs, posture, became acts of reflection, reinforcing the hypnotic cadence. Courtyards, streets, and halls absorbed the quiet presence, folding surrender gently into the fabric of the city. Civilians and soldiers alike moved slowly, threading calm through awareness and memory, presence and observation. And as night deepened, the faint sounds of distant engines and wind drifted softly, integrated into the rhythm of quiet exhalation. The city exhaled along with its people, holding presence, reflection, and inevitability in gentle balance. Every step, gesture, and breath carried calm into the unfolding memory of the day. Berlin rested softly beneath the slow pulse of surrender. The streets, now quiet, held both history and reflection in their folds, debris and dust settling in hypnotic rhythm. Soldiers moved lightly, some pausing to observe, some seated in gentle meditation, threading calm into presence. Officers guided with soft gestures and quiet words, ensuring continuity and gentle awareness throughout the urban landscape. Civilians stepped lightly, collecting fragments of routine, threading measured observation into the city's pulse. Even minor motions, a hand brushing dust, a soft glance exchanged, a subtle nod, contributed to the gentle cadence of acceptance. Courtyards and stairways absorbed the slow movement, the city itself participating in the quiet exhalation of surrender. And as night fully descended, Berlin seemed to fold around its inhabitants, embracing presence, reflection, and soft continuity. The streets, once instruments of defiance, now hummed quietly with the rhythm of calm observation. Every breath, every step, and every lowered weapon carried history softly forward. Surrender had arrived not in noise, but in hypnotic, measured, and gentle exhalation. The first light of morning filtered softly through shattered windows, casting gentle patterns across streets still heavy with debris. Berliners emerged cautiously from cellars, their movements slow and deliberate, eyes adjusting to the quiet newness of a city subdued. Children clutched small belongings, their steps hesitant but measured, threading fragile courage through the silent avenues. The faint scent of dust, warmth, and faint smoke lingered in every breath, grounding presence in tangible sensation. Families gathered in small clusters, whispering quietly, voices low and careful, carrying both relief and lingering apprehension. Each gesture adjusting a coat, brushing dust from hair, offering a gentle hand, wove presence into the rhythm of cautious recovery. Courtyards and empty streets became spaces of reflection, each step threading awareness into the calm pulse of life, slowly returning. Even small motions, like a soft glance exchanged or a tentative smile, carried meaning within the gentle cadence of survival. The city exhaled quietly, stone and rubble absorbing human presence in muted acceptance. Every movement seemed both fragile and resilient, carrying the slow weight of return. Women moved softly through alleys, gathering scattered supplies, threading care and patience into each measured action. The faint warmth of sunlight touched stone and brick, mingling with dust, and the faint residue of smoke to create a sensory tapestry of recovery. Children's whispers and laughter, soft and cautious, echoed gently in courtyards, blending with the city's muted pulse. Even minor gestures, adjusting a bundle of belongings, helping a neighbor across rubble, a hand resting briefly on a stone wall, carried significance, threading calm into the rhythm of life. Streets once filled with urgency and tension now carried a slower, deliberate cadence, each footfall measured and reflective. Families paused at doorways and thresholds, observing the city around them, tracing paths of passage and survival. And as the day unfolded, Berlin seemed to fold gently around its inhabitants, absorbing both presence and subtle hope. The air carried faint warmth and quiet energy, grounding the city in tangible calm. Every breath, every step, and every whispered word became part of the hypnotic rhythm of resumption. Life, tentative yet insistent, began to thread through stone, dust, and quiet streets. Courtyards became points of gentle gathering, small spaces where neighbors exchanged soft words and subtle gestures. The faint scent of warmth, dust, and lingering stone created a grounding sensory map for each careful step. Women and men moved slowly, collecting fragments of daily routine, threading continuity into the fabric of ruined streets. Even children adjusted their movements with measured care, observing and learning the rhythm of cautious freedom. Small actions, lifting a basket, offering water, adjusting clothing, became deliberate acts of reflection, tying presence to awareness. Windows reflected muted light, casting soft patterns on rubble and walls, guiding steps with quiet clarity. And as families moved, the city exhaled in response, folding calm, presence, and subtle continuity into each gesture. Each street, corridor, and broken arch absorbed the rhythm of recovery, threading quiet meditation into human movement. The faint warmth of sunlight grounded attention, integrating awareness into every soft, measured breath. Every step became part of the slow, hypnotic pulse of life, gently returning to Berlin. In quieter corners, small groups paused, leaning against walls or debris, observing softly before moving again. The faint warmth and dust mingled with residual scent of stone and smoke, threading sensory grounding through every breath. Even minor gestures, a hand resting briefly on rubble, a gentle adjustment of clothing, a whisper shared maintained the rhythm of calm and attentiveness. Children navigated carefully among broken streets, guided by parents and neighbors, each footfall deliberate and reflective. Courtyards, stairways, and alleys offered subtle spaces for reflection, temporary pauses in the measured pulse of resumed life. And as daylight shifted across walls and debris, the soft exhalation of the city carried presence, observation, and gentle awareness. Women gathered water and rations, threading careful attention into each action, mindful of resources and of one another. The faint hum of distant activity merged into the hypnotic cadence of presence and recovery. Every movement, breath, and glance contributed to the quiet rhythm threading life back into the city. Berlin seemed to hold its breath, observing the gentle resumption of existence. Soft conversations drifted through streets and courtyards, quiet and deliberate, tethering human connection to the pulse of the recovering city. The faint scent of stone, dust, and warmth carried subtly through each interaction, grounding presence in sensory reality. Small gestures, a hand offered to lift a child, a bundle adjusted, a cautious smile, threaded calm into the rhythm of return. Even the softest steps echoed gently, blending into the hypnotic cadence of awareness and observation. Families moved as cohesive units, each member attentive to the other, threading continuity into the gentle pulse of resumption. Courtyards and thresholds became spaces for reflection, for whispered observation, and for the soft measurement of hope. And as daylight deepened, Berlin exhaled, absorbing the careful presence of those threading life among rubble and memory. The rhythm of recovery, slow and deliberate, intertwined with the city's stone, dust, and warmth, forming a gentle heartbeat. Every breath, glance, and step carried presence, continuity, and the quiet insistence of survival. Life, fragile yet persistent, began to thread through the folds of a city that had held its breath. Through narrow alleys and open courtyards, movement carried a hypnotic cadence, slow yet persistent. Children followed parents and neighbors, observing subtle gestures and mimicking the rhythm of cautious presence. The faint warmth of sunlight mixed with dust and residual smoke, creating a sensory map for careful navigation. Small acts of restoration, lifting belongings, tidying spaces, sharing water, wove human continuity into the soft pulse of the city. Courtyards became temporary havens, small clusters of presence threading awareness into each step. Even minor glances or whispers carried significance, reinforcing connection and calm amidst ruins. And as families moved forward, Berlin seemed to breathe quietly around them, folding stone, dust, and human presence into gentle exhalation. The city absorbed every step, every pause, every tentative smile into its layered memory. Each action carried awareness, reflection, and the hypnotic rhythm of return. Life threaded carefully, slowly, insistently, through the folds of empty streets and broken walls. Evening light softened streets, highlighting dust, stone, and subtle warmth, integrating sensory grounding into each movement. Families paused to rest, leaning lightly on walls or rubble, whispering quietly and observing the rhythm of presence. Children nestled close, feeling the gentle pulse of attention and care guiding each step. Small gestures adjusting blankets, lifting a basket, offering water threaded continuity and calm into the city's pulse. Courtyards and empty rooms became observatories for reflection, spaces for the slow meditation of resumed life. And as the sun sank, shadows stretched gently across streets and alleys, threading awareness and calm into the quiet rhythm. The faint scent of stone, dust, and warmth persisted, tethering breath and attention to tangible reality. Even in silence, presence hummed softly, a hypnotic cadence of cautious hope. Every step, glance, and gesture reinforced the gentle pulse of the city, exhaling into life. Berlin, broken yet enduring, held its inhabitants in soft, patient embrace. As night approached, families gathered in quieter corners, small fires flickering gently, warmth mingling with the faint air of stone and dust. Movement slowed further, footsteps soft and deliberate, threaded through the hypnotic cadence of attention and reflection. Even minor gestures, a hand resting, a whisper shared, a small adjustment of clothing, carried meaning within the gentle rhythm of return. Children drifted towards sleep, guided by measured presence and the subtle pulse of care threading each action. Courtyards and streets held quiet observation, absorbing every breath, step, and gesture into the city's calm exhalation. And as darkness settled, Berlin embraced the gentle pulse of life returning, threading history, memory, and continuity into each shadowed corner. The faint warmth of air, the lingering scent of stone, and the muted hum of distant activity grounded every breath in presence. Every step, glance, and gesture became part of the hypnotic rhythm, threading life slowly back into the city. The pulse of calm, measured awareness, and gentle survival continued through rubble, walls, and streets alike. In this quiet unfolding, the city exhaled softly, holding its people in patient, enduring embrace. The city lay in a quiet, muted stillness, its streets threaded with the soft grey of dust and ash, settling gently over broken stone. Burned libraries exhaled faint smoke, the scent of charred paper lingering in air heavy with silence. Monuments, once tall and proud, rested in fractured repose, their weight of memory softened by the muted light of afternoon. Piles of debris formed subtle hills, each shadowed contour reflecting the rhythm of absence, of things once present now folded gently into the earth. Families walked slowly, their steps tentative across streets that remembered both passage and ruin, threading awareness into the silent pulse of place. Even minor gestures, a hand brushing dust from stone, a child leaning against a parent, a soft whisper shared carried meaning within the quiet cadence of observation. Courtyards and avenues, once familiar, became spaces of reflection, holding each movement as if absorbing presence into their muted breath. And as wind drifted through shattered windows and alleys, it seemed to carry memory softly, threading past and present into a single measured exhalation. Every step through rubble, every glance at fractured walls, wove human presence into the hypnotic rhythm of aftermath. The city itself seemed to fold around its people, a soft embrace threaded with echoes of history. Ash drifted lazily across wide avenues, mingling with faint warmth and the lingering scent of stone, smoke, and memory. Trees, stripped bare or bowed under weight, swayed gently, integrating movement into the muted rhythm of the city. Children followed softly, their small gestures tentative yet present, threading curiosity and careful attention into the silent streets. Adults moved in deliberate, measured steps, adjusting bundles or holding one another, grounding presence in tactile rhythm. Even minor sounds, a whispered word, the scuff of shoes on rubble, a distant creak of stone, carried amplified significance within the calm cadence of reflection. Courtyards and open spaces offered subtle pauses, moments of quiet observation and gentle meditation on what remained. And as sunlight shifted across fractured stone and twisted metal, shadows stretched long and soft, integrating awareness into each breath and gesture. Every glance, step, and gentle motion became part of the hypnotic pulse threading life among ruins. The scent of warmth, ash, and dust carried subtly, tethering attention to each slow, reflective motion. Berlin, though broken, exhaled softly, carrying memory and presence in quiet balance. The rubble-strewn streets held layers of absence, each corner a silent testament to vanished lives, vanished routines, and the pulse of history. Even small gestures, resting a hand on broken brick, adjusting a shawl, a quiet nod, threaded human continuity into the city's calm exhalation. Women moved lightly, collecting what could be salvaged, their steps measured, mindful and slow. Children's soft laughter and whispered questions threaded a fragile rhythm into the streets, balancing presence against quiet reflection. Courtyards and stairways, once bustling, absorbed the gentle motion, holding every step, glance, and breath as part of the hypnotic cadence. Even distant sounds, the faint creak of shifting stone or whisper of wind, carried significance, integrating rhythm into awareness. And as shadows deepened, sunlight softened, folding warmth and clarity into the folds of the streets. Dust and warmth mingled, scenting air with tangible presence, grounding each step, each breath, and each glance. Every gesture, every pause, every measured motion contributed to the quiet meditation of survival. The city exhaled, stone and ash, absorbing presence, threading calm into memory. Faint smoke lingered over courtyards, alleys, and open squares, curling softly around fractured walls and twisted metal. Steps echoed quietly in passageways, measured and deliberate, threading presence into spaces of absence. Adults guided children gently, teaching both caution and awareness in the rhythm of movement. Even the smallest gestures, a shift of weight, a soft glance, a hand adjusting clothing, reinforced the hypnotic cadence, threading life among ruins. Courtyards became soft havens, absorbing presence into quiet exhalation, offering reflection and gentle observation. And as sunlight moved slowly across stone, the muted warmth mingled with the faint scent of ash and dust, tethering awareness to place and moment. Broken windows and arches framed the slow pulse of return, capturing shadow, light, and presence in equal measure. Every step, every breath, every whispered word threaded calm into the rhythm of the city. The streets, fractured yet patient, seemed to fold around their people in a measured, reflective embrace. Berlin exhaled softly beneath the pulse of attention and quiet meditation. Graves and markers dotted corners, parks and gardens, each one a quiet note in the soft symphony of remembrance. The faint warmth of air mingled with scent of stone, dust, and lingering smoke, grounding presence in the tangible pulse of the city. Children paused beside markers, small hands resting lightly, threading awareness into the slow rhythm of memory. Adults whispered quietly, gestures measured, each breath carrying reflection into every step. Even distant echoes, a faint wind across rubble, a soft creak of timber, blended seamlessly into the hypnotic cadence of observation. Courtyards and streets offered spaces for reflection, absorbing human presence into the quiet exhalation of history. And as shadows lengthened, sunlight softened, integrating warmth, dust, and stone into a gentle contemplative rhythm. Every gesture, pause, and step carried both calm and recognition, threading life gently into the aftermath. The city itself seemed aware, absorbing memory and presence into its folds. Berlin, fractured yet patient, exhaled quietly beneath the rhythm of quiet reckoning. Through shattered avenues, families moved softly, pausing to observe, to gather, to reflect on the quiet traces of a world changed. The faint warmth of late afternoon mingled with lingering scent of stone, dust, and ash, creating sensory grounding for measured movement. Children followed attentively, copying small gestures, learning the rhythm of presence and caution. Adults moved deliberately, collecting what remained, threading continuity and calm into every step. Even minor gestures, a whispered word, a shift of weight, a gentle glance, carried amplified significance, threading awareness into the city's pulse. Courtyards and stairways absorbed the movement, folding presence into calm observation. And as sunlight softened across debris and stone, shadows lengthened gently, integrating reflection into every breath. Dust motes drifted lazily in the warmth, tethering awareness to the tactile reality of streets and walls. Every step, gesture, and quiet word carried meditation and attention, reinforcing the hypnotic rhythm of return. Berlin exhaled slowly, its fractured streets embracing human presence in gentle balance. In quieter pockets, soft winds drifted through alleys and courtyards, carrying faint scents of stone, ash, and warmth. Families paused intermittently, leaning lightly on walls, rubble, or each other, threading calm into awareness. Children's small hands held tightly, guided by careful attention, moving in measured rhythm through fractured streets. Even minor gestures, a hand adjusting a bundle, a soft nod, a brief glance, carried profound presence within the hypnotic cadence. Courtyards and open spaces absorbed these movements, offering subtle reflection and gentle meditation, and as sunlight dimmed, shadows deepened with gentle clarity, threading calm and awareness into each step, each breath, each gesture. Dust and warmth continued to anchor perception, tethering attention to tangible reality. Every movement, glance, and whispered word became part of the soft pulse threading life back into the city. Berlin, though fractured, held its people gently, exhaling slowly beneath the rhythm of return. Each breath, each step, and each gesture carried memory and calm forward. Night approached softly, folding gentle shadow across streets, courtyards, and empty squares, the city exhaling in quiet meditation. Families settled carefully, small fires flickering gently, warmth mingling with the lingering scent of stone, ash, and dust. Children rested close to parents, comforted by presence, threading slow rhythm into the cadence of survival. Adults adjusted belongings, shared whispered words, and moved gently, grounding awareness in measured attention. Courtyards and alleys absorbed presence, threading reflection into stone, rubble, and the pulse of life. Even minor gestures, a shift of weight, a soft glance, a hand held briefly, reinforced the calm rhythm of continued presence. And as night deepened, the city folded around its inhabitants, holding memory, presence, and fragile hope in gentle balance. Every step, breath, and gesture carried history softly forward, threading life into the quiet exhalation of Berlin. Dust and warmth lingered, a tactile map of awareness and endurance. Berlin, fractured yet patient, held its people in soft, enduring embrace, exhaling slowly into the night. The news of Germany's unconditional surrender drifted slowly across the world, carried in careful words and measured proclamations that resonated with relief and contemplation. In distant capitals, flags were raised, voices cheered, and quiet celebrations unfolded in streets that had long known tension and vigilance. Yet Berlin, still dust-laden and hushed, remained strangely inert, streets and courtyards holding the memory of conflict in quiet exhalation. Families moved softly among rubble, observing what remained with tentative attention, threading presence into the gentle rhythm of survival. Even minor gestures, a hand held briefly, a whispered word, a small nod, carried significance within the calm cadence of awareness. The faint warmth of late afternoon touched broken stone and lingering debris, integrating sensation into the hypnotic pulse of reflection. Soldiers and civilians alike paused in small courtyards, absorbing both relief and subtle melancholy, tethered to the slow rhythm of awareness. And as the sun shifted across walls and alleys, Berlin exhaled gently, carrying memory, presence, and fragile hope forward. Every step, every glance, every small gesture became part of the quiet meditation, threading through the city. The world beyond celebrated, while the city folded inward, contemplating both absence and survival. Across Europe, messages traveled slowly, confirming cessation, surrender, and the formal ending of hostilities. The faint hum of communication threaded through airwaves and telegraphs, subtle yet insistent, weaving order into a world just freed from prolonged tension. Leaders and diplomats observed with measured calm, their words carrying both relief and cautious foresight into the unfolding days. Civilians abroad celebrated softly, voices mingling with the gentle pulse of evening and the scent of warming air. Streets far from Berlin hummed with gentle elation, yet each cheer was tethered subtly to reflection. The memory of years folded into every exhalation, and within Berlin, absence and silence remained, the pulse of rubble-strewn streets and quiet courtyards, guiding presence into calm observation. Even minor movements, an adjustment of a bundle, a soft nod, a whispered remark, threaded human continuity into the quiet rhythm of a city, exhaling slowly. Dust motes drifted lazily through sunlight, carrying warmth and tethering attention to each measured breath. The contrast between celebration abroad and muted presence within Berlin created a delicate tension of reflection. Every gesture, every footfall, and every whisper carried history softly into awareness. The streets, now empty of conflict, held layers of quiet observation, each corner absorbing presence into subtle meditation. Children wandered carefully, following the measured steps of adults, threading curiosity into the rhythm of calm and reflection. The faint warmth of stone and lingering scent of ash and dust grounded each breath in tangible awareness. Even minor gestures, touching a stone wall, adjusting clothing, exchanging a soft glance, threaded awareness into the hypnotic cadence of the city. Courtyards and alleys, still littered with debris, became observatories for reflection, places where presence mingled with memory. And as shadows lengthened, the soft light folded over broken windows and twisted metal, integrating gentle awareness into every motion. Soldiers and civilians observed quietly, their gestures deliberate, each step carrying continuity and calm. The city exhaled slowly, integrating human presence with stone, rubble, and lingering traces of life interrupted. Every breath, glance, and gesture contributed to the hypnotic pulse threading awareness through time and space. Berlin, fractured yet patient, absorbed presence softly, holding memory and reflection in gentle balance. Messages of surrender reached every military outpost, confirming that hostilities had ceased and marking the end of long-strained anticipation. The faint hum of voices, telegrams, and written words carried both relief and subtle tension, foreshadowing divisions that would soon shape the post-war world. Civilians paused to absorb the significance, threading presence into every measured movement and gentle exhalation. Even minor gestures, a hand brushing dust from a sleeve, a soft nod, a whispered acknowledgement, carried weight within the calm rhythm of observation. Courtyards and streets became soft points of reflection, absorbing every breath step, and small action into the slow pulse of awareness. And as sunlight shifted across stone and debris, warmth mingled with dust and lingering air, grounding perception in tangible presence. Families moved slowly, collecting what remained, threading calm into everyday gestures and measured observation. Children whispered softly to one another, learning the rhythm of presence and cautious relief. The world beyond celebrated, while the city remained tethered to memory, observation, and quiet reflection. Every step, gesture, and breath carried history gently forward into the soft exhalation of the city. Across the Allied nations, celebrations were tempered with thought, recognizing both victory and the shadows of cost and loss. Flags waved in gentle rhythm, voices rose softly in streets, and light danced across windows and rooftops, creating a subtle cadence of exhalation. Yet Berlin remained hushed, streets and alleys carrying memory in the soft cadence of stillness. Adults guided children through streets lined with rubble, threading awareness into each careful step, each glance, and each small gesture. Even the faintest movements, adjusting clothing, shifting weight, offering water, reinforced the calm rhythm of observation and cautious recovery. Courtyards, empty lots, and fractured homes absorbed the presence, folding life and memory gently into the hypnotic pulse of the city. And as shadows lengthened with the late afternoon sun, warmth and light mingled with lingering dust and faint smoke, grounding awareness in tangible sensation. Soldiers walked slowly through streets, steps measured, gestures deliberate, threading calm into the rhythm of presence. Every breath, glance, and small motion contributed to the soft meditation of reflection and return. Berlin exhaled quietly, holding its people gently in the rhythm of resumed life. Amid celebration abroad, subtle tensions began to ripple beneath the surface of alliances, hints of difference threading through careful words and measured gestures. Even in quiet observation, Berlin seemed to sense these distant undercurrents, streets absorbing reflection alongside memory and presence. Civilians moved with deliberate care, threading cautious attention into each step and gesture, aware of both relief and the subtle foreshadowing of new realities. Children explored slowly, guided by adults, learning the rhythm of survival and observation in a city reshaped by absence and history. Minor actions, shifting weight, adjusting packs, exchanging whispered words, reinforced calm, tethering awareness to both immediate and reflective presence. Courtyards, alleys, and thresholds became spaces of soft meditation, absorbing presence into stone, dust, and lingering traces of human life. And as sunlight waned, warmth lingered, integrating sensory grounding into the hypnotic cadence of the city. Every breath, every glance, every gesture threaded awareness into the quiet exhalation of post-war reflection. The streets, though fractured, embraced human presence and memory with gentle continuity. Berlin exhaled slowly, holding calm and awareness in the soft rhythm of recovery. The faint warmth of evening touched rooftops, walls, and debris, threading sensation into the rhythm of cautious observation. Soldiers and civilians alike moved gently through courtyards and streets, gestures deliberate, steps measured, threading calm into the pulse of presence. Even minor interactions, soft words shared, a glance exchanged, a hand briefly resting, carried weight within the hypnotic cadence of reflection. Dust and warmth mingled with faint lingering air, grounding awareness in tangible presence, sensory and subtle observation. Children learned slowly, copying gestures, following measured steps, threading attention into the quiet pulse of life. Courtyards and empty lots absorbed presence, every breath and movement folding gently into the soft exhalation of the city. And as night deepened, shadows blended with warmth, integrating calm, reflection, and awareness into every gesture, every step, Every glance, every whispered word contributed to the slow rhythm threading recovery into Berlin. The world beyond celebrated, while the city maintained quiet meditation and gentle reflection. Berlin exhaled softly, patient, enduring, and quietly tethered to both memory and continued presence. As darkness settled, streets and courtyards held quiet observation, each stone, wall, and fragment of debris absorbing presence into subtle meditation. The faint warmth of lingering air mingled with dust and scent of stone, creating tactile grounding for every step and gesture. Families moved softly, gestures deliberate, threading awareness into measured breaths and the rhythm of cautious survival. Even minor motions, a hand adjusting a coat, a whispered word, a soft nod, reinforced calm and presence within the hypnotic cadence of resumed life. Courtyards, alleys, and open spaces offered reflection, absorbing presence gently into the pulse of the city. And as stars appeared, Berlin exhaled slowly, stone and rubble folding memory, presence and subtle hope into quiet balance. Children rested, guided by adults, threading awareness and cautious curiosity into gentle rhythm. Every glance, breath, and gesture became part of the hypnotic meditation of post-war life. Soldiers paused, observing streets and courtyards, presence tethered to reflection and continuity. The city, fractured yet enduring, held calm and awareness gently, exhaling softly into the rhythm of history. A pale, wintry light unfolded over Berlin, brushing the ruins with soft, muted warmth that mingled with the lingering chill of early morning. Soviet soldiers wandered slowly through streets, still lined with rubble, their boots stirring dust that drifted lazily in the quiet air. The scent of stone, ash, and faint smoke carried gently across courtyards and alleys, grounding awareness in tangible presence. Children and families moved hesitantly, threading careful steps through familiar streets now softened by absence and quiet reflection. Every gesture, a hand brushing dust from stone, a soft adjustment of clothing, a slow glance across broken walls, became part of the city's measured rhythm. Courtyards and gardens, though scarred, offered moments of stillness, absorbing the human presence into gentle exhalation. The air itself seemed to pause, holding memory, presence, and quiet contemplation in equal measure. Soldiers' voices were low, reflective, tethered to duty and awareness, threading calm into every motion. Even distant sounds, the faint wind through broken windows, the rustle of clothing, the soft echo of footfalls, integrated seamlessly into the hypnotic pulse of morning. Berlin, fractured yet patient, exhaled slowly beneath the rhythm of cautious observation and quiet endurance. Refugees drifted through avenues and squares, carrying small bundles of personal history and essentials for survival. Their movement was measured and deliberate, each step carefully placed, each gesture quiet yet full of weight. Adults guided children with gentle hands, threading calm, awareness, and continuity into every motion. Dust and warmth mingled, grounding perception in both air and stone, integrating sensory awareness into the rhythm of presence. Courtyards absorbed pauses, small gatherings of human presence held softly against the echoes of memory. Even minor gestures, a glance, a soft word, a hand resting briefly, carried amplified significance, integrating reflection into action. Soldiers observed with quiet vigilance, occasionally offering guidance or assistance, blending duty with careful meditation. And as sunlight shifted, illuminating fractured walls and broken stone, shadows stretched slowly, threading warmth and clarity into movement. The city itself seemed to exhale, folding memory, presence, and subtle hope into every measured step. Every breath, glance, and gesture carried awareness into the hypnotic cadence of recovery. Allied leaders gathered elsewhere, their discussions distant yet shaping the fragile balance of a new world. Each decision, each word, each subtle negotiation carried the weight of post-war hopes, anxieties, and emerging tensions. The soft rustle of papers, the quiet murmur of voices, and the measured pace of gestures created a rhythm of careful awareness. Back in Berlin, streets absorbed these distant currents, carrying presence and reflection through every alley and courtyard. Children's soft footsteps and whispered questions threaded cautious curiosity into the gentle pulse of life. Adults guided each movement, grounding awareness in stone, dust, and faint warmth. Even minor acts of observation, adjusting a bundle, a quiet nod, a whispered word, reinforced calm and continuity. Courtyards and open spaces folded human presence into the stillness, threading meditation into rubble, stone, and memory. And as sunlight softened over fractured walls, Berlin exhaled, patient, reflective, and quietly tethered to both history and the fragile dawn. Every motion, every gesture, every breath contributed to the hypnotic rhythm of presence and awareness. The air smelled faintly of ash and stone, mingling with warmth and distant scent of smoke from fires long spent. Soldiers walked slowly, eyes attentive, threading reflection and awareness into measured steps. Refugees paused gently at doorways and thresholds, observing familiar streets with tentative recognition. Every movement, every glance, every careful adjustment reinforced the soft pulse threading calm through the city. Courtyards and alleys absorbed human presence into quiet meditation, holding awareness in gentle embrace. Children's curiosity moved slowly, guided by adults' measured hands, learning the rhythm of observation and careful interaction. Even subtle gestures, a touch on a shoulder, a whispered word, a slow nod, integrated awareness into the hypnotic cadence of the morning. And as the sun climbed higher, light mingled with dust and faint warmth, grounding perception in tangible reality. Berlin exhaled softly, its fractured streets and buildings holding presence, memory, and reflection in quiet balance. Every step, breath, and gesture carried awareness gently into the unfolding rhythm of fragile peace. The frozen streets and shattered buildings held layers of history, each stone absorbing presence into reflective meditation. Adults moved deliberately, threading careful attention into every step, every glance, and every gesture, anchoring awareness in place. Children followed slowly, learning the rhythm of cautious exploration and gentle observation. Dust swirled softly in the faint breeze, scenting air with stone, ash, and warmth, tethering perception to sensory reality. Even minor gestures, adjusting a coat, a bundle, or a whispered exchange, reinforced the calm rhythm threading presence into the streets. Courtyards and squares, though scarred, absorbed human movement into quiet exhalation, creating a hypnotic pulse of reflection. Soldiers and civilians alike paused intermittently, observing, breathing, and threading presence into the slow cadence of life. And as sunlight shifted across rooftops and broken walls, shadows lengthened and softened, integrating awareness into every gesture. The city, fractured yet enduring, held memory, presence, and quiet contemplation gently. Every breath, glance, and step contributed to the hypnotic rhythm of recovery and reflection. Among the ruins, whispers of conversation threaded through alleys and open spaces, soft, tentative, and full of presence. Adults shared guidance. Children asked questions, and small gestures, hands resting briefly, heads nodding, carried meaning within the calm cadence of observation. Dust motes drifted slowly, warmed by gentle sunlight, integrating awareness into every step and measured motion. Courtyards absorbed pauses and presence, folding reflection gently into rubble, stone, and human continuity. Soldiers' boots scuffed softly against stone, their measured steps blending vigilance with gentle awareness. Even minor movements, a soft shift of weight, a glance across a street, a quiet word reinforced calm and continuity within the rhythm of presence. And as wind drifted through fractured walls and alleys, it carried both warmth and memory, threading reflection into the soft exhalation of Berlin. Every gesture, breath, and step became part of the city's measured pulse, tethering life to awareness and meditation. The pale dawn continued to unfold, carrying calm, quiet, and soft presence across every street and courtyard. Berlin exhaled gently, patient, reflective, and quietly tethered to history and fragile hope. Soft light continued to filter through broken windows and arches, brushing walls and rubble with muted warmth. Families moved slowly, threading awareness into each step and gesture, integrating presence into the hypnotic cadence of the city. Children whispered softly, learning rhythm, patience, and observation alongside adults, guiding every motion. Dust and air mingled with warmth, creating sensory grounding for each movement, each glance, and each breath. Courtyards and alleys absorbed human presence, folding reflection and quiet meditation into every corner. Even minor gestures, a soft touch, a hand adjusting a bundle, a quiet word reinforced the rhythm of calm and awareness. Soldiers paused intermittently, observing, guiding, and threading deliberate steps into the measured exhalation of the city. And as shadows lengthened and the light softened, Berlin held its people gently, integrating presence, memory, and fragile peace into every motion. Every step, glance, and breath became part of the soft pulse, threading calm, reflection, and cautious hope. The city exhaled quietly, patient, enduring, and softly tethered to the rhythm of new beginnings. As morning gave way to early afternoon, movement continued gently, measured and reflective, threading calm into the streets. Refugees, soldiers, and families all shared the same slow, deliberate rhythm of presence, integrating awareness into the pulse of the city. Dust motes drifted in sunlight, mingling warmth with faint air and the scent of stone, ash, and lingering history. Children paused to observe, following adults' gestures, threading careful attention into their curiosity. Every motion, glance, and soft word reinforced the hypnotic cadence of recovery and cautious reflection. Courtyards, open squares, and alleys absorbed presence, creating spaces of quiet meditation amidst ruins. And as light shifted, shadows blended with warmth and dust, tethering awareness to every step, breath, and gesture. Soldiers moved slowly, maintaining presence and vigilance, integrating calm into their steps. Every interaction, every pause, every subtle gesture carried continuity and reflection into the soft rhythm of Berlin. The city exhaled slowly, patient, enduring, and quietly holding all who moved within its fractured embrace.